In the quiet years that bridged the early and middle decades of the 19th century, the American landscape unfolded in broad stretches of farmland, modest towns, and slowly developing roads that connected communities still finding their place within a growing nation. It was a world shaped by steady labour, seasonal rhythms, and the unhurried passage of rural life. In this setting, James Abram Garfield began his journey, a life that would move gradually from the simplicity of frontier Ohio to the responsibilities of national leadership. His story is one of persistence carried gently across changing circumstances, shaped not by sudden leaps, but by a calm devotion to learning, service, and thoughtful responsibility. As we drift through the quiet chronology of his life, we pause for a moment to settle into the slow atmosphere of this series. If you feel inclined, you may gently support the channel by liking the video, subscribing for future stories, or sharing where in the world you are listening from tonight. These small gestures help this calming historical journey continue, though they never call for urgency. They rest lightly here, just as the narrative does, asking nothing more than quiet presence. And now, with the night settling softly around the story, we begin with the origins of James Garfield's life, in a landscape of modest beginnings and steady labour, where the earliest patterns of character took shape. James Abram Garfield entered the world on November 19, 1831, in the rural settlement of Orange Township in the northern part of Ohio. The region belonged to a portion of Ohio shaped by recent settlement, where forests had only recently given way to farmland, and where families built their lives through patient effort. The township offered little in the way of bustle or commerce. Instead, it provided a landscape of simple homes, quiet fields, and the soft cadence of daily labour dictated by the seasons. Into this calm but demanding environment, Garfield was born as the youngest of 4 children in a household marked by modest means and steady values. His parents, Abram and Eliza Garfield, had arrived in the region as many settlers did, seeking land, opportunity, and the possibility of building a life through their own efforts. Abram devoted himself to farming, cultivating the land with a persistent rhythm familiar to frontier families. The work was constant, requiring careful attention to soil, livestock, and weather. Yet the Garfield household was not defined solely by labour. There existed a quiet aspiration for learning, moral steadiness, and the hope that, in time, the children might have opportunities shaped by diligence and character. Garfield's earliest years were marked by the presence of family stability rather than outward comfort. The home was modest, built of simple materials, warmed by a hearth that served as the centre of domestic life. Within these walls, the Garfield children experienced the routines typical of rural families: chores completed without haste, meals prepared from what the land provided, and evenings spent in conversation or quiet tasks that brought a sense of order to the household. These early surroundings formed the texture of Garfield's childhood, shaping his understanding of work, cooperation, and the quiet dignity of persistence. A profound shift came early in his life with the death of his father in 1833. Garfield, still an infant, would not carry memories of Abram, yet the absence shaped the household with lasting effect. Eliza Garfield, left to raise 4 children alone, approached this responsibility with calm resilience. She managed the farm, tended to the needs of the household, and fostered within her children a sense of self-sufficiency and moral clarity. Her determination offered a steady foundation during years that might otherwise have been defined by loss. Through her example, young James absorbed the values of endurance and thoughtful attention that would later influence every stage of his public and private life. The Garfield home remained a place of work, but it also carried an atmosphere of gentle discipline. Eliza encouraged her children to read scripture, to consider their own conduct, and to approach each day with purpose. Her expectations were not harsh. Rather, they reflected a belief that character grew through consistent, quiet effort. James, though very young, began to show signs of curiosity, listening intently to his siblings, asking early questions and observing the world around him with the attentive stillness that becomes noticeable in children inclined toward reflection. The physical environment of Orange Township played its own role in shaping Garfield's early development. Woods surrounded the family farm, offering a world of natural rhythms that mark the seasons. The soft emergence of spring foliage, the warm quiet of summer afternoons, the rust-coloured patterns of autumn leaves, and the stillness of winter fields. These landscapes provided both practical lessons and imaginative space, grounding Garfield's early sense of the world in the calm patterns of nature. Although his childhood carried hardships, it unfolded within a setting that encouraged exploration, resilience, and careful thought. Neighbours in the township formed a small but supportive community. Families helped one another with harvests, shared tools when needed, and gathered for occasional social events at churches or schoolhouses. Within this environment, Garfield experienced a sense of belonging that would remain meaningful throughout his life. The community valued simplicity and sincerity, qualities that Garfield absorbed gradually as he grew from infancy into early childhood. During these foundational years, James developed the traits that would later define him: an eagerness to learn, a willingness to work, and a quiet receptiveness to the guidance of those around him. These qualities emerged not through instruction alone, but through the daily routines of a household that balanced the demands of survival with the desire for growth. Even in the early stages of life, Garfield's mind moved toward curiosity and inquiry, nurtured by a mother who believed in the quiet strength of knowledge. As he moved beyond infancy into childhood, Garfield's life remained closely tied to the land and to the rhythms of rural Ohio. Yet within the simplicity of these surroundings, the first shapes of a future scholar and statesman began to take form. His earliest environment, though humble, provided the steadiness from which his later aspirations would gently rise. And James Garfield's childhood unfolded in an atmosphere shaped by modest means, steady labour, and the quiet determination of a family learning to move forward after loss. In the years following his father's death, the Garfield household in northern Ohio became a place where endurance and gentle discipline guided each day. Eliza Garfield, now the central figure in her children's upbringing, managed the farm with calm resolve. Though the work was demanding, she approached it without complaint, believing that steady effort could sustain both land and family. Under her guidance, the Garfield children learned to navigate the challenges of rural life with a seriousness softened by her quiet encouragement. James, the youngest, grew through these early years surrounded by siblings who shared responsibilities in a way that fostered cooperation, where each child tended to tasks appropriate to age and strength, bringing water from the well, sorting firewood, helping in the fields, and performing chores that maintained the household's stability. These routines unfolded without haste, forming a rhythm that gave structure to their days. Even in the midst of duty, there existed moments of gentle ease, pauses to observe the changing light across the fields, to listen to birdsong drifting from nearby woods, or to watch neighbours moving deliberately through their own routines. For James, these early impressions created a foundation of attentiveness that would remain throughout his life. Rural Ohio in the 1830s and 1840s offered few luxuries, but it provided space for quiet reflection. The natural world surrounding the Garfield home played a significant role in shaping James's early sense of wonder. Tall trees bordered the edges of the property, their branches forming shifting patterns above him as he explored the shaded paths near the farm. Streams wound through the land, offering places where a child might pause to watch the movement of water or observe the stillness of stones beneath the surface. These simple landscapes sparked curiosity in James, encouraging him to ask questions about the world's workings even before he encountered formal lessons. Though the family had limited means, Eliza ensured that the children received moral instruction and early education. Reading materials were sparse but cherished. A family Bible, a few religious texts, and small collections of essays or stories provided the earlier sources of learning. Eliza read aloud when time permitted, her voice calm and measured. Through these readings, James absorbed both the content of the passages and the discipline of listening. He learned the quiet patience required to sit attentively, allowing words to settle gradually into understanding. This combination of moral grounding and early exposure to language shaped the beginnings of his intellectual tendencies. Neighbours played a part in the community's educational efforts as well. Small one-room schoolhouses dotted the region, offering basic instruction during periods when farming demands allowed children to attend. James first experienced schooling in such an environment, where children of varying ages gathered under the guidance of a single teacher. Their lessons emphasized reading, writing, arithmetic, and recitation. James approached these early studies with eagerness, displaying a natural aptitude that caught the attention of instructors. Though school attendance was often interrupted by agricultural responsibilities, he returned each time with renewed interest, gradually building the skills that would guide him toward more advanced learning. Despite the demands of work and study, James's childhood carried a sense of quiet resilience. He faced hardships common to frontier families, unpredictable harvests, harsh winters, and the absence of his father. But these challenges unfolded within a household where determination was met with encouragement. Eliza's presence provided stability. She guided her children gently, correcting them when needed, yet always affirming the value of discipline applied without harshness. Her influence shaped James's understanding of responsibility, teaching him that strength need not be loud, and that perseverance often grows from steady, patient acts. As James advanced from early childhood into youth, his responsibilities expanded. He learned to handle tools, tend crops, and manage tasks that required increasing physical strength. Yet even as he embraced the demands of farm work, he nurtured an inner world shaped by imagination and inquiry. During breaks or in the quiet hours after chores, he often sought moments alone, turning his thoughts towards stories he had read or questions stirred by his surroundings. This balance between physical labour and mental exploration cultivated a sense of proportion that would later influence his ability to navigate the varied demands of adulthood. Garfield's childhood also carried moments of companionship with village children. Neighbours lived at respectful distances, but community gatherings, barn raisings, church services, and seasonal events allowed children to meet, play, and share the gentle camaraderie of rural life. James participated in these gatherings with a mixture of enthusiasm and reserve. He enjoyed games and conversation, yet often observed with a thoughtful quietness that suggested his mind was drawn as much to reflection as to activity. Those who knew him in these years described a boy who was both spirited and contemplative, capable of curiosity without impulsiveness. Religion played a steady role in the Garfield household. Church services, though simple, offered a source of guidance and communal identity. Eliza encouraged her children to attend regularly, emphasizing the importance of humility, honesty, and compassion. For James, the sermons provided opportunities to think about broader ideas, questions of purpose, morality, and the responsibilities individuals hold toward others, though he did not yet imagine a future in ministry or public life. These early experiences nurtured the reflective tendencies that would later shape his approach to leadership. By the time James reached early adolescence, he had grown into a young man shaped by hardship, guided by strong familial values, and sustained by a quiet hunger for knowledge. His world remained small in geographic terms, yet rich in the lessons that emerge from steady labour and attentive observation. He understood the demands of rural life and the rhythms of a household built on resilience. At the same time, he sensed the possibility of something beyond the boundaries of Orange Township, opportunities that might arise from study and self-improvement. These early years, though simple in outward appearance, formed the essential base of Garfield's character. They instilled in him a belief in the value of perseverance, the dignity of work, and the quiet power of learning pursued with sincerity. As he moved toward the next stage of his life, the qualities shaped in childhood would guide him into new environments, places where his curiosity could expand, his intellect could grow, and his steady determination could open doors to experiences far beyond the modest fields of his youth. As James Garfield grew into early adolescence, the quiet routines of rural life in northern Ohio continued to shape his days, yet his inner world expanded steadily. What had begun as a child's simple interest in stories and scripture deepened into a broader curiosity, one that reached beyond the boundaries of the family farm and into the realms of knowledge, ideas, and possibility. Though his surroundings remained defined by modest means and seasonal labour, James increasingly sensed that learning might open pathways unavailable through physical work alone. This quiet realization did not arrive suddenly. Instead, it unfolded gently, guided by small moments of insight and the patient encouragement of those around him. Work on the Garfield farm demanded much of James's time. Each day carried tasks that began early and stretched into the late afternoon, tending animals, gathering wood, assisting with crops, and helping neighbours during periods of shared effort. While these duties built strength and discipline, they also reinforced his awareness that his ambition stretched beyond the fields he worked. He performed each task with diligence, yet his thoughts often drifted toward books, lessons, and the wider world hinted at in stories he had encountered. These contrasts, the physical demands of daily labour and the mental pull of learning, created a tension that gradually shaped James's direction. His mother, Eliza, continued to watch this development with attentive understanding, and recognising that her younger son possessed both intellectual promise and a quiet determination, she encouraged his early studies whenever circumstances allowed. Though the household required the labour of every able hand, she believed firmly in the value of reading and moral instruction. Her guidance, gentle yet consistent, provided James with an early framework for disciplined study. She offered him time for learning when work permitted, ensuring that his emerging curiosity did not wither under the weight of necessity. Access to books remained limited, yet the few volumes available held significant influence. The family Bible, simple readers, and borrowed text from neighbours became windows into broader ideas. James approached each book with care, reading slowly and returning to passages repeatedly. These readings strengthened his vocabulary, sharpened his ability to reason, and introduced him to narratives that extended far beyond rural Ohio. Even when chores occupied his hands, ideas from his readings occupied his thoughts, weaving into his understanding of the world. Community schooling offered another avenue for Garfield's emerging intellectual development. The one-room schoolhouse he attended during the winters, when farm work lightened, provided basic instruction in arithmetic, reading, spelling, and writing. The classroom was modest, furnished with simple desks, chalkboards, and a wood-burning stove that warmed the space during colder months. Students of all ages gathered together, learning under the guidance of a single teacher whose responsibilities required patience and flexibility. Within this environment, James began to distinguish himself not through loud displays but through consistent attentiveness. He listened carefully to every lesson, completed his work with quiet diligence, and often stayed after class to ask additional questions. Though the school's curriculum remained limited, James absorbed everything offered. His teachers observed that he exhibited a rare combination of effort and curiosity, approaching even simple assignments with an interest in understanding the underlying principles. He memorized easily, recited clearly, and demonstrated a growing ability to connect new information with what he already knew. These early achievements built confidence and affirmed for him that learning could be both a joy and a path forward. Beyond formal lessons, the schoolhouse nurtured Garfield's early engagement with community life. He interacted with peers who shared similar challenges and aspirations, forming friendships that balanced companionship with mutual encouragement. Despite his innate quietness, James displayed a natural ability to inspire others through steadiness and sincerity. He often assisted younger students, explaining concepts patiently and offering gentle support when they struggled. These interactions, though informal, reflected the beginnings of a leadership style rooted in service rather than authority. As Garfield approached his mid-teens, his sense of restlessness grew. The physical demands of farm work, combined with the limited opportunities for formal education, made him increasingly aware of the constraints of his environment. While he valued the lessons of perseverance that rural life had instilled, he also felt drawn toward a broader horizon, one filled with books, ideas, and perhaps a calling that had not yet taken shape. This internal tension led him to explore possibilities beyond the farm, though he did so with caution, mindful of his family's needs and the realities of their financial constraints. One of the most defining moments of this period occurred when James expressed interest in attending a neighbouring school with a more advanced curriculum. Though such a decision required sacrifices, Eliza encouraged him gently, believing that education offered her son a path she had long hoped he might follow. With her support, James took steps toward expanding his studies, walking long distances to attend better-equipped schools when schedules allowed. These journeys, often made on foot in all kinds of weather, became symbolic of his growing commitment to learning. James's early work experiences outside the home also contributed to his development. As a teenager, he sought employment that could help support the family while giving him exposure to new environments. He worked as a carpenter's assistant and took on odd jobs in nearby communities, demonstrating adaptability and a willingness to learn practical skills. These experiences provided a contrast to farm labour and introduced him to individuals who recognised his intelligence and encouraged his ambitions. Throughout these years, Garfield's sense of purpose deepened. Education, once a sporadic pursuit shaped by the rhythms of rural life, became a central thread in his aspirations. He began to see learning not merely as a means of personal advancement, but as a way to understand the world with clarity and moral insight. The encouragement of his mother, the modest resources of local schools, and his own quiet determination all converged to shape a young man ready for more formal academic challenges. By the time Garfield reached the threshold of late adolescence, the foundations of his character had been firmly established. He carried with him the resilience forged through hardship, the moral grounding instilled by his upbringing, and the curiosity nurtured in schoolhouses and borrowed books. His path remained uncertain, yet his determination to pursue education, despite the obstacles, set him on a course that would soon lead him far beyond the familiar fields of his childhood. The next stage of his journey would take him into environments where his intellectual gifts could flourish, guided always by the steady discipline that had quietly shaped him from the beginning. James Garfield's journey toward formal education took a significant turn when he arrived at the Western Reserve Eclectic Institute in 1851. Known today as Hiram College, the institute had been established only 4 years earlier, yet it already carried a reputation for earnest scholarship and a commitment to accessible learning. For Garfield, still only 19 and shaped by years of rural hardship, the arrival in Hiram marked a gentle but decisive shift. The quiet hillside campus, composed of simple buildings and open grounds, offered him not merely instruction, but a space in which his long-nurtured curiosity could deepen into disciplined study. The institute reflected values that resonated strongly with Garfield's upbringing. It emphasized moral purpose, community, and intellectual effort over social distinction or wealth. Students came from families of varied means, many, like Garfield, determined to better themselves through steady study and thoughtful living. The atmosphere was modest and orderly. Classrooms held few adornments, recitation rooms were plain, and the library, though small, contained carefully chosen volumes. Yet within these simple surroundings, Garfield sensed a new world opening before him. His first months as a student required significant adjustment. Having grown up in a setting where physical labour governed the day, he now encountered schedules structured around lessons, reading assignments, and examinations. Garfield approached these expectations with the same quiet determination he had applied to farm work. He rose early, studied by lamplight when necessary, and applied himself to each subject with attentiveness. His instructors soon recognized both his diligence and the underlying strength of his intellect. He absorbed material quickly and demonstrated an ability to think beyond memorized facts, seeking connections between ideas and applying careful reasoning in his recitations. Financial limitations shaped Garfield's student life, yet they did not diminish his progress. To support himself, he worked on campus performing tasks essential to the institute's functioning, sweeping floors, chopping wood, and assisting with maintenance. These responsibilities, while time-consuming, provided structure to his days and reinforced the discipline that had long characterized his approach to work. He often balanced long hours of labor with equally long hours of study, demonstrating a commitment that impressed classmates and instructors alike. The academic environment of the eclectic institute encouraged exploration across a wide range of subjects. Garfield studied mathematics, classical languages, literature, natural sciences, and philosophy. Each discipline offered him new ways of understanding the world. He developed an early appreciation for the precision of mathematics, the expressive beauty of Latin and Greek, and the broad ethical questions posed by philosophy. His instructors noted his ability to engage deeply with complex material while maintaining a steady temperament. Garfield rarely allowed challenges to unsettle him. Instead, he met them with quiet persistence, working methodically until understanding became clear. Beyond the classroom, Garfield found intellectual companionship among his fellow students. Conversations often continued long after lessons ended, unfolding in the hallways, across the campus lawn, or beside the modest fireplaces in student residences. Garfield participated actively in these informal discussions, offering observations in a thoughtful tone. Though he possessed natural eloquence, he did not dominate conversations. Instead, he listened carefully, contributing when he felt his thoughts might clarify or expand the subject at hand. During his first year, Garfield was encouraged to join the school's literary societies, student organizations devoted to debate, public speaking, and the study of literature. These societies played a significant role in shaping the intellectual culture of the institute. Garfield entered them with humility, aware of his limited experience, yet he quickly discovered that these gatherings suited him well. The slow, deliberate preparation required for debates appealed to his disciplined mind, while the practice of speaking before others offered a means of developing skills that would later define his public life. Over time, he grew increasingly confident, learning to present arguments with clarity and calm reasoning. Garfield's conduct and promise impressed the Institute's leaders, and before long, he was entrusted with responsibilities beyond his studies. He began tutoring other students who struggled in various subjects, offering guidance with patience and kindness. His ability to explain complex topics in simple terms reflected not only his understanding of the material, but also his natural inclination towards service. These tutoring sessions mark the early expression of the teaching gift that would later play a central role in his time at the Institute. As he continued to grow academically, Garfield also experienced a deepening of his religious reflections. The Eclectic Institute, founded by the disciples of Christ, encouraged moral inquiry and thoughtful engagement with Scripture. Garfield, influenced by the quiet faith of his mother, approached these studies with sincerity. He began to consider the possibility of ministry, sensing that the combination of intellectual effort and moral purpose suited his nature. Though he did not yet commit to a particular path, these reflections would later guide several of his important decisions. Physical health, however, presented an occasional challenge. Garfield had endured periods of illness as a young man, and the demanding combination of work and study sometimes taxed his strength. Yet even during times of fatigue, he persisted gently, adjusting his routines rather than abandoning them. His resilience reflected the habits formed in childhood, where perseverance was learned through necessity. At the Institute, this resilience translated into an ability to balance responsibilities without allowing discouragement to take hold. By his second year, Garfield's presence at the Eclectic Institute had grown more prominent. Instructors valued his reliability, students sought his assistance, and the campus community recognized in him a young man of unusual promise. His life at Hiram carried a sense of quiet purpose. Each season brought new lessons, new books, and new reflections that gradually prepared him for greater challenges. His world, though still centered in a small Ohio community, expanded through the steady accumulation of knowledge and the deepening of his intellectual and moral foundations. These years represented a turning point. For the first time, Garfield experienced an environment designed to nurture his abilities fully. The modest halls of the Institute, the routines of study and service, and the thoughtful company of instructors and peers all contributed to the shaping of a young man whose future would unfold far beyond the village of Hiram. As Garfield approached the conclusion of his initial course of study, he began to consider what form his next steps might take. The Eclectic Institute had awakened in him both an appetite for learning and a sense of vocation. Whether through teaching, ministry, or continued study, he sensed that the quiet persistence of his early years was guiding him toward a life shaped by thought, responsibility, and service. By the early 1850s, James Garfield had grown into a young man shaped by discipline, curiosity, and the quiet resilience formed through years of rural labour and earnest study. His time at the Western Reserve Eclectic Institute had revealed both his intellectual gifts and his capacity for steady effort. Yet he felt the need to test himself further. The Institute encouraged learning within modest means, but Garfield sensed that to reach his full potential, he must seek a broader academic world. After thoughtful consideration and gentle consultation with mentors, he decided to pursue advanced study at Williams College, an institution known for rigorous scholarship and a peaceful, contemplative environment well suited to his temperament. The decision to leave Ohio and travel eastward reflected Garfield's growing confidence. It also demonstrated his willingness to embrace new challenges, though he approached them without haste or grand aspiration. In the summer of 1854, he began the long journey to Massachusetts, moving steadily across the varied landscapes that separated his rural upbringing from the academic hills of Williamstown. The quiet stretches of countryside, the gradual shift from familiar farmlands to the wooded slopes of New England, and the modest rhythm of travel all offered him time for reflection. Garfield later recalled that the journey deepened his resolve and affirmed his sense that education could open pathways rooted in both service and understanding. Upon arriving at Williams College, Garfield found a setting that differed from Hiram in scale, yet shared its atmosphere of earnestness. The campus, nestled among the Berkshire Hills, offered a tranquil environment that supported focused study. Simple, well-kept buildings surrounded open lawns, and the quiet presence of the mountains gave the college a sense of steady permanence. For Garfield, accustomed to modest surroundings, the setting felt both inviting and conducive to the thoughtful rhythm he desired. Faculty and students at Williams welcomed him with warmth, recognizing in him a combination of humility and capability that set him apart. Garfield entered as a junior after successfully completing placement examinations. These exams required demonstration of proficiency in classical languages, mathematics, and general scholarship, subjects he'd pursued diligently during his years at Hiram. His ability to pass them with ease affirmed the strength of his earlier education and provided reassurance as he prepared to undertake more advanced work. The curriculum at Williams was structured and demanding. Garfield studied Greek and Latin literature, moral philosophy, rhetoric, and higher mathematics. He approached each subject with steady dedication, never rushing through assignments, but instead allowing ideas to settle gradually through repeated reflection. His professors noted his ability to grasp complex concepts with clarity, and they admired the quiet thoroughness with which he engaged with texts. Garfield's recitations, delivered in a calm and measured voice, reflected both understanding and careful preparation. His life at Williams was simple and disciplined. Garfield lived modestly, often preparing his own meals and managing his expenses with great care. He balanced his studies with small jobs that helped support his needs, just as he had done in Ohio. These responsibilities carried no sense of burden for him. Rather, they formed a familiar pattern that complemented his academic work. His days unfolded in a gentle rhythm, mornings spent in classes, afternoons in study, evenings in the quiet companionship of fellow students or in solitary reflection with books. Despite his natural reserve, Garfield soon became a respected presence on campus. He participated in literary societies where debates, essays, and orations formed an important part of student life. These gatherings offered him opportunities to develop his skills in public speaking, a talent that, though still emerging, displayed remarkable promise. Garfield approached these exercises with the same careful preparation he applied to his academic work. His speeches were calm, structured, and free from excessive embellishment, demonstrating a clear mind and a disciplined approach to communication. Garfield also formed strong relationships with his professors, many of whom recognized the sincerity of his intellectual pursuits. Among them, the college president, Mark Hopkins, exerted a particularly meaningful influence. Hopkins' philosophical approach to education, which emphasized moral development alongside intellectual growth, resonated deeply with Garfield. Their conversations, often conducted in a quiet and reflective manner, helped shape Garfield's philosophy of life and leadership. He later spoke with gratitude of the guidance he received at Williams, describing it as a formative experience that strengthened both his reasoning and his sense of purpose. Although Garfield's academic progress was steady, his years at Williams were not without challenges. At times, the workload weighed heavily upon him, and he contended with the lingering effects of past illnesses. Yet he faced these difficulties with the same quiet perseverance that had carried him through hardship in childhood. When fatigue slowed his progress, he adjusted his pace, allowing himself periods of rest before returning to his studies with renewed focus. His ability to maintain balance between effort and recovery reflected a mature understanding of his own capacities. As graduation approached in 1856, Garfield found himself near the top of his class. His achievements at Williams had confirmed not only his intellectual abilities, but also his capacity for leadership grounded in thoughtfulness and humility. The commencement exercises, conducted with quiet ceremony, mark the close of an important chapter in his life. Garfield received his degree with gratitude, aware that the education he had gained would shape his future in ways still unknown to him. Following graduation, Garfield lingered briefly in Williamstown, reflecting on the 2 years that had so profoundly influenced him. The calm hills, the steady voices of professors, and the disciplined routines of student life had all contributed to the shaping of a young man ready to serve his community in new ways. Though he felt gratitude for the experiences he had gathered, he also sensed a gentle pull toward returning to Ohio, toward the familiar landscapes of Hiram, where responsibilities awaited him. His time at Williams did not transform his ambitions through sudden revelations. Instead, it refined the qualities he already possessed: sincerity, perseverance, clarity of thought, and a deep respect for learning. As Garfield prepared to return westward, he carried with him a strengthened sense of direction, though its full expression would unfold gradually. His journey from rural hardship to academic achievement had shaped a foundation sturdy enough to support the greater responsibilities that lay ahead. When James Garfield left Williams College and made his way back to Ohio in the summer of 1856, he returned not as the uncertain young man who had once departed, but as a scholar strengthened by disciplined study and broadened horizons. His destination was the familiar hillside village of Hiram, where the Western Reserve Eclectic Institute awaited him. The institute had played a formative role in his early development, and now it offered him an opportunity to guide others along the path he had taken. Slowly, steadily, and with sincere dedication to learning, Garfield returned with a quiet resolve to teach, to serve the community, and to live within the thoughtful rhythms that had shaped his academic life. The institute greeted him warmly. Many instructors remembered him as an earnest student, and they recognized at once that his 2 years at Williams had deepened both his knowledge and his sense of purpose. Garfield accepted a teaching position with gratitude, understanding that the role carried responsibilities greater than the classroom alone. At the Eclectic Institute, teachers were also mentors, community figures, and supporters of students whose ambitions often outpaced their resources. Garfield had known these conditions firsthand, and he approached his new role with humility, believing that his own experiences might help him guide others in a measured and thoughtful way. His early days as an instructor reflected both nervousness and determination. Standing before a room of students felt different from reciting in his own undergraduate classes. Yet Garfield settled quickly into the work. His voice, calm, deliberate and expressive, held the attention of his students. He explained complex ideas with clarity, grounding lessons in the broader context of moral reflection and intellectual purpose. In mathematics, languages, and rhetoric, he encouraged his students to move beyond memorization and into deeper understanding. His teaching style, shaped by the influence of Mark Hopkins and others at Williams, emphasized the disciplined inquiry he valued. Garfield's classroom often became a place of lively but thoughtful engagement. Students asked questions freely, confident that their instructor would respond with patience. When they struggled, he offered guidance without haste, or walking them through problems step by step. His ability to simplify difficult subjects made him popular among students, many of whom came from backgrounds similar to his own, homes where formal education had been limited yet deeply desired. Garfield recognized their determination, and he encouraged it gently, believing that each lesson contributed not only to knowledge, but to character. Beyond the classroom, Garfield embraced a quiet leadership role within the institute. He helped organize literary societies, assisted with administrative tasks, and supported efforts to expand the school's resources. He also gave public lectures, simple, thoughtful talks delivered in the evenings to students and townspeople. These gatherings provided opportunities for reflection on history, science, philosophy, and scripture. Garfield approached each lecture with care, preparing his remarks slowly and allowing ideas to settle before shaping them into a steady narrative. His words conveyed not only knowledge, but a sense of calm encouragement, reinforcing the belief that thoughtful study could strengthen both individuals and the community. During this time, Garfield also deepened his involvement in religious life. The Eclectic Institute's ties to the disciples of Christ brought opportunities for him to speak in local congregations. Though he had not originally sought a ministerial role, his natural ability to communicate clearly, combined with his sincere moral reflections, led others to view him as a promising figure in religious service. He accepted invitations to preach with a sense of responsibility rather than ambition, and offering sermons marked by humility and a quiet focus on the ethical teachings of Scripture. These experiences reinforced his belief that leadership in any form, educational, civic, or religious, required steadiness and sincerity. Financial considerations still shaped Garfield's life. The modest salary of an instructor was not enough to fully support him, so he continued to balance various responsibilities. He took on administrative duties at the institute, tutored students privately, and occasionally performed manual labour during school breaks. These efforts, though exhausting at times, never drew complaint from him. Instead, they reflected the habits formed in childhood, where persistence through difficulty had been essential. As months passed, Garfield's responsibilities expanded further, and he was appointed principal of the Eclectic Institute, a role that required oversight of curriculum, faculty coordination, and general management of the school's daily operations. The position demanded careful planning and quiet authority, yet Garfield accepted it calmly, believing that the Institute's mission aligned with his own calling. His leadership style was collaborative. He sought input from instructors, listened attentively, and avoided decisions made in haste. Under his guidance, the school maintained an atmosphere of disciplined study and mutual respect. Amid these duties, Garfield's personal life also advanced. He continued to correspond with Lucretia Rudolph, a thoughtful and well-educated young woman he had known since his early years in Hiram. Their relationship unfolded with gentle steadiness. Both valued learning, a moral purpose, and calm reflection, qualities that deepened their connection over time. Though their courtship was quiet and deliberate, it carried a sense of mutual understanding that would later anchor Garfield through the demands of political and military service. Garfield's own intellectual pursuits did not diminish during his years as an instructor and administrator. He continued to read widely, studying history, philosophy, and classical literature. His evenings often passed in quiet study, a lamp illuminating the pages of well-used books. These personal efforts enriched his teaching and sermons, offering him a deeper reservoir of understanding from which to draw. He wrote regularly, letters, sermon outlines, and reflections on subjects ranging from education to civic life. These writings reveal a young man steadily preparing himself for responsibilities still unseen. Community members in Hiram came to view Garfield as a trusted figure. He offered counsel when asked, participated in local initiatives, and provided an example of disciplined living. His influence grew not through forceful assertions, but through consistent presence. Whether teaching, speaking, or assisting with daily tasks at the Institute, Garfield demonstrated a steadiness that individuals of all ages found reassuring. By the late 1850s, Garfield's role in Hiram had grown into something larger than he had anticipated. He had become a teacher, administrator, minister, and community leader, each role woven together through the quiet thread of service. The rural boy who had once struggled to find time for schooling now guided an entire institution devoted to the very learning he had long cherished. As he approached the next phase of his life, Garfield sensed that his path might soon expand again. The skills he had developed, steadiness, clarity, patience, and disciplined inquiry, prepared him for challenges beyond the boundaries of the eclectic institute. Yet he carried forward the lessons of Hiram, that leadership begins with service, that knowledge grows through humility, and that meaningful change often unfolds through quiet and deliberate effort. As James Garfield continued his work at the Western Reserve Eclectic Institute, his personal life moved forward with the same gentle steadiness that characterized his academic and professional pursuits, and central to this emerging chapter was his deepening relationship with Lucretia Rudolph, a woman he had known since youth and whose thoughtful nature matched his own. Their connection, formed quietly through years of shared study, conversation, and mutual respect, represented a calm and steady presence within the evolving responsibilities of Garfield's life. The bond between them grew gradually, shaped not by dramatic gestures, but by the quiet confidence that accompanies genuine companionship. Lucretia, or Crete, as she was often called, had attended the institute during Garfield's early years there as a student and later as an instructor. She possessed a reflective mind, a disciplined approach to learning, and a gentle but firm sense of purpose. Her temperament complemented Garfield's, offering both reassurance and subtle challenge. Their early letters and conversations revealed a relationship rooted in intellect and moral grounding. They discussed books, ideas, and the quiet obligations of daily life, each finding in the other a steady, thoughtful counterpart. Courtship unfolded slowly. Garfield, occupied with teaching, administrative duties, and occasional preaching engagements, approached their relationship with deliberate care. He valued sincerity and clarity in personal matters, and he sought assurance that any future marriage would be built upon shared values and mutual respect. Lucretia, equally cautious and serious-minded, welcomed this thoughtful approach. Their correspondence reflects two individuals exploring the foundations of partnership with patience and introspection, speaking openly about hopes, uncertainties, and the kind of home they wish to build. In 1858, after years of gradual closeness, James and Lucretia were married. The ceremony was modest, reflecting the simplicity of their surroundings and the understated nature of their bond. Friends and family gathered quietly, offering their support as the couple began this new chapter. There was no lavish celebration, no elaborate display, only the calm warmth of a union rooted firmly in shared purpose and steady affection. Married life for the Garfields began in a small home in Hiram, close to the institute where James continued to teach and lead. Their early domestic life reflected the gentle rhythms of the community. Mornings brought a sense of purposeful routine, James preparing for classes or administrative meetings, Lucretia tending to household tasks or continuing her own studies. Evenings unfolded in quiet companionship, near often with James reading aloud or Lucretia writing letters. Their home became a place of calm reflection, a refuge from the steady demands of the school and the responsibilities that continued to grow around them. Though modest in size, their home reflected the values they cherished. Books occupied shelves and tables, emphasizing the intellectual life central to their partnership. Simple furnishings created an atmosphere of comfort rather than display. Both James and Lucretia believed that a household should be shaped by order, sincerity, and thoughtful living, rather than by material accumulation. Their shared environment affirmed these beliefs, providing a steady foundation for the years to come. The early years of marriage also brought the beginnings of family life. In 1860, the couple welcomed their first child, a son named Eliza Arabella, whom they called Trot. The experience of parenthood deepened the bond between James and Lucretia, though it introduced new responsibilities and concerns. Garfield, already accustomed to balancing multiple roles, accepted the duties of fatherhood with quiet seriousness. He approached them as he did all obligations, with patience, reflection, and a desire to guide gently rather than with force. Lucretia, thoughtful and observant, brought a calm steadiness to the nurturing of their child. She managed the household with quiet efficiency, ensuring that James's responsibilities at the Institute were not disrupted. The presence of a child added warmth to their home, bringing moments of joy amid the complexities of daily life. Garfield found solace in these moments, and recognizing them as a counterbalance to the demands of public and professional duties. Yet their joy was tempered by sorrow when their daughter passed away in infancy. The loss marked the family with a quiet grief, carried with dignity and supported by the strength of their partnership. James and Lucretia faced the sorrow together, finding comfort in the shared understanding of the loss and the belief that endurance could emerge even from deep sadness. This experience, though painful, strengthened the quiet resilience of their marriage. In the years that followed, more children were born into the Garfield family, adding a sense of growth and continuity. Each child brought new layers of responsibility, yet also deepened the warmth of the household. The presence of young voices and gentle laughter filled the rooms of their Hiram home, blending naturally with the rhythms of study and reflection that remained central to their lives. Garfield delighted in the role of father, finding joy in reading to his children, guiding their early learning, and observing their unique personalities. Throughout this period, Garfield's professional responsibilities expanded in ways that placed increasing demands on his time. His reputation as an educator and community leader grew steadily. He continued to teach a wide range of subjects, often preparing lessons late into the night. He advised students, managed administrative matters, and maintained his involvement in local religious life. Yet the stability of his home life offered him a place of calm respite. Each evening, after the day's responsibilities were complete, the quiet companionship of Lucretia and their children allowed Garfield to regain the balance he needed to continue serving effectively. Lucretia's support proved essential during these demanding years. Her understanding of James's character allowed her to anticipate the pressures he faced, and she provided steady encouragement without placing additional strain upon him. Their marriage functioned as a partnership in the truest sense, each supporting the other through the many responsibilities, joys, and challenges that shaped their early family life. Garfield admired her intellect, respected her judgment, and found comfort in her gentle presence. Amid the quiet routines of teaching, administration, and family life, Garfield experienced moments of introspection regarding his future path, and he wondered whether his work as an educator and local leader represented the full measure of his calling. Teaching brought him fulfillment, and he cherished the influence he held over young minds. Yet he sensed that the skills he had developed, the ability to communicate clearly, to reason carefully, and to inspire others through steady leadership, might prepare him for broader responsibilities beyond Hiram. These reflections surfaced gradually, never interrupting the calm of his daily life but settling quietly within him as possibilities for the future. He continued to fulfill his duties with the care and discipline that defined his character, uncertain of where the path might lead, yet confident that each step would unfold in its proper time. The steady routines of home and school provided the foundation from which any future transition would rise. By the late 1850s, Garfield had become firmly rooted in the life of Hiram, a respected educator, a thoughtful minister, a devoted husband, and a father whose home reflected the values he held most dear. Though he did not yet foresee the dramatic shifts that would soon reshape his life, he lived each day with a calm assurance that service, learning, and steady dedication formed the truest measure of a meaningful life. As the 1850s drew toward their close, James Garfield found his responsibilities at the Western Reserve Eclectic Institute deepening, yet the world beyond Hiram began to call for broader leadership. National tensions, long simmering beneath the surface of American political life, now were reaching a point of quiet but unmistakable strain. Questions surrounding slavery, states' rights, and the nation's future grew more pressing with each passing year. In this atmosphere, Garfield's thoughtful temperament and disciplined habits made him a figure to whom community members increasingly turned, not only for instruction, but for guidance on matters that touched the fate of the nation. Though Garfield did not initially imagine a future in politics, the gradual encouragement of neighbours, colleagues, and local leaders pushed him toward public service. They saw in him a clarity of reasoning, a sense of fairness, and an ability to communicate complex ideas calmly and without agitation. These qualities, cultivated quietly during years of study and teaching, are aligned closely with the needs of a state and nation navigating profound uncertainty. Garfield, still cautious and reflective by nature, resisted the idea at first. His work at Hiram felt meaningful, and he believed that the responsibilities of education and community leadership already filled his life with purpose. Yet he also recognized that the issues confronting the country demanded voices committed to thoughtful understanding. In 1859, community members approached Garfield with increasing insistence, encouraging him to seek a seat in the Ohio Senate. Though unsure of his readiness, he understood that service, approached with sincerity and care, might allow him to contribute to the broader well-being of his state. After weeks of reflection, supported by quiet conversations with Lucretia and trusted colleagues, Garfield agreed to stand for election. His candidacy emerged without fanfare. He did not pursue grand campaigns or dramatic appeals. Instead, he met with neighbours in a calm, respectful manner, explaining his views with the same clarity he used in the classroom. Garfield aligned himself with the emerging Republican Party, whose principles, particularly the opposition to the expansion of slavery, reflected his own beliefs shaped by years of moral reflection and study. The political landscape of the time required steady voices capable of discussing contentious issues without inflaming tensions. Garfield approached these challenges with moderation, expressing his views firmly yet without agitation. His speeches, delivered in small gatherings across northeastern Ohio, emphasized the importance of unity, constitutional responsibility, and the long-term health of the nation. Election to the Ohio Senate in late 1859 marked the beginning of Garfield's formal political career. He entered public service with humility, aware that legislation required not only conviction, but an understanding of the careful procedures by which laws are shaped. Upon arriving in Columbus for the legislative session, Garfield encountered an environment far different from the quiet halls of the Eclectic Institute. The State House carried the hum of debate, the measured tones of committee deliberations, and the constant movement of individuals seeking to advance various causes. Yet Garfield adapted to this new world with calm attentiveness, listening more often than he spoke during his early days. The Ohio Senate provided Garfield with a space to develop his public voice, one grounded in principle rather than ambition. His speeches were carefully prepared, thoughtful, and free from excessive flourish. He spoke not to stir emotions but to clarify ideas, believing that effective leadership required steady reasoning. Colleagues quickly noticed his ability to articulate complex issues with precision. His quiet yet firm tone distinguished him in a chamber where voices often rose with the intensity of the times. As national tensions escalated, Garfield participated in legislative decisions that reflected the emerging challenges facing Ohio and the country. He supported measures to strengthen the state militia, recognizing that the deepening national crisis might require organized defense. He also backed efforts to improve education and public institutions, emphasizing that a well-informed citizenry formed the foundation of a stable democracy. His votes and committee work demonstrated a balanced approach, thoughtful, orderly, and rooted in a desire to promote the public good. During these months in Columbus, Garfield maintained close ties to Hiram. He returned home when legislative breaks allowed, resuming his teaching duties and offering sermons or lectures as requested. His dual responsibilities, as educator and legislator, demanded careful time management, yet he approached each role with the gentleness and discipline that characterized his nature. He never allowed political duties to overshadow his connection to the Institute or his family. Instead, then he found in teaching a source of grounding that balanced the increasingly complex questions debated in the Senate. His marriage to Lucretia provided steady support during this period of transition. She understood the quiet weight he carried as he navigated public responsibilities, and she offered encouragement through letters that reflected her keen mind and calm presence. Garfield in turn shared his reflections on legislative deliberations with her, finding in these exchanges a source of clarity and reassurance. Their partnership, rooted in mutual respect, strengthened as political pressure mounted across the nation. Meanwhile, events on the national stage continued moving toward conflict. In early 1861, the secession of southern states and the unfolding crisis surrounding federal authority demanded immediate attention from state governments. Garfield participated in discussions on how Ohio should respond, lending his voice to efforts aimed at ensuring readiness while avoiding unnecessary escalation. His contributions were marked by caution and principle, reflecting his belief that disagreements must be met with steady, thoughtful action. As the months progressed, the quiet tension of national uncertainty grew unmistakable. Garfield's time in the Ohio Senate coincided with one of the most significant turning points in American history, a moment when public leaders were called to navigate challenges of profound consequence. Though he did not yet foresee the military responsibilities that would soon shape his life, Garfield sensed that the nation was moving toward events that would require service of a different kind. His experience in the Senate, rooted in calm deliberation, careful study, and a commitment to public welfare, prepared him for the transitions to come. He had learned to articulate his beliefs confidently, to listen attentively, and to weigh decisions with moral clarity. These qualities, shaped quietly through years of teaching, found new expression in the legislative halls of Ohio. They would soon be called upon again, not within the State House, but on the fields where the country's deepest conflict would unfold. When the first signs of armed conflict emerged in 1861, James Garfield felt the quiet but unmistakable pull of national duty. His work in the Ohio Senate had already immersed him in the debates surrounding secession and the preservation of the Union, but the outbreak of hostilities at Fort Sumter shifted the atmosphere from tense deliberation to decisive action. For Garfield, whose life had been shaped by steady moral reflection and disciplined thought, the moment carried a clarity that did not require dramatic proclamation. His sense of responsibility, developed over years of service in education and public life, led him calmly toward enlistment. Though still relatively young, Garfield recognized that the conflict would demand leadership from individuals prepared to balance courage with careful judgment. His experiences as a teacher, administrator, legislator, and minister had instilled in him a capacity for organization, communication, and thoughtful decision-making. While he possessed no formal military training, his reputation for quiet steadiness and moral conviction made him a natural choice for a leadership role within Ohio's volunteer force. Local officials, aware of his capability, encouraged him to accept a commission in the state militia being rapidly assembled. Garfield approached the decision with his characteristic deliberation. He consulted with Lucretia, whose calm support once again aligned with his own sense of duty. She understood that the demands of the moment extended beyond personal comfort, and that James felt compelled to serve in whatever capacity the nation required. Her encouragement, steady, thoughtful, and free from sentimentality, provided Garfield with the assurance he needed to accept the responsibility before him. In the summer of 1861, Garfield accepted command of the 42nd Ohio Volunteer Infantry, a regiment composed largely of young men from communities across the northeastern part of the state. Many of the volunteers were former students of Garfield's, drawn not only by patriotism, but also by their respect for him as an educator and mentor. This connection created a sense of familiarity within the regiment. The men knew his character and believed he would lead them with the same fairness and clarity he had demonstrated in the classroom. Garfield's approach to military leadership reflected the same habits that guided his academic and civic life. He studied thoroughly, dedicating long hours to learning tactics, formations, and the organizational structure of the Union Army. He read treatises on military science and sought guidance from experienced officers. Rather than relying on improvisation or authority alone, he grounded his decisions in careful preparation. His discipline, combined with a calm, reassuring manner, earned the respect of his men, who observed that he neither raised his voice nor acted in haste. Training the 42nd Ohio involved both physical and mental preparation. Garfield insisted on orderly routines, steady drilling, and clear communication. He believed that discipline, applied gently but consistently, would serve the men well in the demanding months ahead. Yet he also understood the importance of addressing their fears and uncertainties. Garfield spent time speaking with soldiers individually, offering quiet words of encouragement. His presence conveyed stability during a period when the scale and consequences of the war were still difficult to comprehend. As the regiment progressed through its early training, Garfield's responsibilities expanded. He worked closely with state officials to secure equipment and supplies, ensuring that the men under his command were properly outfitted. These tasks required persistence and attention to detail, reflecting the logistical challenges faced by volunteer units across the Union. Garfield approached each problem methodically, seeking practical solutions without resorting to frustration. This calm adaptability became one of his defining characteristics as a military leader. In late 1861, Garfield and the 42nd Ohio received orders to move into Kentucky, a region whose control was considered vital by both the Union and the Confederacy. The campaign there unfolded in dense forests, along quiet rivers, and through towns where loyalties were divided. Garfield's assignment was to push Confederate forces out of eastern Kentucky and secure control of key positions. It was a complex responsibility for a new officer, yet he accepted it with the same quiet steadiness he brought to every challenge. The winter march into Kentucky tested the endurance of the regiment. The landscape, though calm in appearance, presented difficulties: muddy roads, cold winds, and the weight of equipment carried across long distances. Garfield moved among his men during these marches, offering encouragement and ensuring that supplies were distributed fairly. His presence reassured the soldiers, many of whom were experiencing the hardships of military life for the first time. The campaign culminated in early 1862 with the Battle of Middle Creek, one of Garfield's first significant engagements. The encounter unfolded along wooded slopes and narrow ravines, where visibility was limited and movements required careful coordination. Garfield's calm decision-making under pressure distinguished him. He interpreted the terrain quickly, adapted to shifting conditions, and directed his men with clarity. His orders were steady and measured, free from the urgency that might unsettle inexperienced troops. The Union forces succeeded in driving the Confederates from the region, securing eastern Kentucky and strengthening the Union's strategic position. Garfield's conduct during the battle earned him recognition in military circles and the rank of brigadier general. Yet he accepted the commendation with modesty, attributing success to the discipline and courage of his men. He viewed the outcome not as a personal achievement, but as a vindication of careful preparation and steady leadership. Following Middle Creek, Garfield continued operations in Kentucky, helping restore order in areas disrupted by war. He worked with civilians, oversaw supply lines, and negotiated the complex tensions common in border regions. His leadership remained consistent, patient, principled, and guided by a desire to minimize harm where possible. Soldiers under his command later recalled his fairness and his ability to remain composed even when confronted with uncertainty. During periods of quiet between campaigns, Garfield wrote frequently to Lucretia. His letters reflected both devotion to his family and the disciplined introspection that long guided him. He described the landscapes through which he travelled, the conditions of his regiment, and the moral weight of the conflict. These writings reveal a man who, despite the demands of war, remained grounded in reflection and strengthened by the steady presence of those he loved. As 1862 progressed, the scale of the war expanded. Garfield found himself entrusted with increasingly complex responsibilities, and his quiet rise through the ranks continued. Yet throughout these transitions, he remained consistent in character, never seeking recognition, never rushing decisions, always approaching each task with care. His military career, like his earlier life, unfolded through sustained effort rather than sudden leaps. By the end of this early phase of service, Garfield had become a respected officer whose leadership reflected the disciplined foundations of his upbringing, education, and early professional life. His experiences in Kentucky marked the beginning of a journey that would take him through some of the most demanding challenges of the war, shaping him into a figure whose quiet strength would later guide him through the complexities of national leadership. After his early successes in Kentucky, James Garfield's responsibilities within the Union Army expanded steadily, shaped by the same disciplined temperament he had displayed in every stage of his life. The winter campaign at Middle Creek had demonstrated his ability to combine calm judgment with decisive action, qualities that senior commanders soon came to value. Though still young for a general officer, Garfield approached each new assignment with humility, aware that the scale of the war demanded continuous learning and a steady composure. His rise through the ranks did not reflect personal ambition so much as the quiet confidence others placed in his capacity to bring order to complex situations. In the months following Middle Creek, Garfield continued operations in eastern Kentucky, strengthening Union control throughout the region. He supervised the reconstruction of transportation routes, coordinated supply movements, and worked to stabilize areas disrupted by shifting military lines. These tasks required administrative skill as much as tactical understanding, yet Garfield embraced them patiently. His ability to communicate clearly with both military personnel and local civilians fostered cooperation during a period when loyalties remained divided. He recognized that stability came not only from military victories, but from steady governance and respectful dealings with the population. During this period, Garfield served under the broader command of officers operating in the Western Theater, including General Don Carlos Buell, and later, briefly, the forces coordinated by Ulysses S. Grant. The shifting structure of the Union Army meant that assignments changed frequently, and Garfield adapted quietly to new organizational demands. Whether tasked with reconnaissance, coordinating movements between divisions, or overseeing the disposition of troops in contested areas, he approached each responsibility with the same calm diligence that had guided him through academic and legislative life. One of his significant responsibilities involved supervising the protection of supply lines running through remote regions. The rugged terrain of Kentucky and Tennessee presented continual challenges. Narrow mountain passes prone to ambush, rivers swollen in spring months, and long distances between depots that strained the Army's ability to maintain steady provisioning. Garfield accepted these logistical burdens without complaint, understanding that the success of Union operations depended not only on battlefield outcomes, but on the hidden work of sustaining armies across great distances. He moved often, inspecting routes, speaking with commanders of smaller detachments, and ensuring that the basic needs of soldiers were met with fairness. While Garfield did not participate in some of the major early engagements of the war, such as Fort Donelson or Shiloh, he observed firsthand the sobering realities of conflict. Letters to Lucretia reveal a growing awareness of the war's human toll. He wrote with quiet sorrow about the suffering he encountered, and he reflected on the moral responsibilities of leadership in a conflict that touched every household in the nation. Yet these reflections didn't weaken his resolve. Instead, they deepened his commitment to carrying out his duties with steadiness, mindful that the lives of men under his command depended on the clarity of his decisions. In the summer of 1862, Garfield faced a period of illness that temporarily interrupted his active field service. The demanding climate, long marches, and ongoing administrative pressures taxed his health, leading to bouts of exhaustion and fever. He accepted this setback with characteristic patience, focusing on recovery rather than frustration. During his convalescence, he continued reading military treatises and reports, strengthening his theoretical understanding of strategy and organization. This steady intellectual preparation helped equip him for future assignments that would require more complex decision-making. By late 1862, Garfield had regained his strength and returned to active duty, this time as Chief of Staff to General William S. Rosecrans, commander of the Army of the Cumberland. This role represented a significant expansion of Garfield's responsibilities, placing him at the center of planning and coordination for one of the Union's major armies. But Rosecrans valued Garfield's clarity of thought, his disciplined writing, and his measured temperament, qualities essential for managing the vast flow of information and decisions required by an army in the field. As Chief of Staff, Garfield oversaw communication between divisions, prepared reports, drafted orders, and guided the organizational structure that sustained operations across Tennessee and northern Alabama. The work demanded constant attention, reviewing intelligence, assessing terrain, and coordinating the movements of tens of thousands of soldiers. Garfield approached these tasks with calm precision, avoiding hasty recommendations and grounding his advice in careful analysis. His colleagues later noted that he possessed an unusual ability to process complex information without losing sight of practical realities. One of the most consequential aspects of Garfield's service with Rosecrans involved his contributions to strategic planning during the lead-up to the Battle of Chickamauga. He studied maps, analyzed reports from subordinate commanders, and provided Rosecrans with assessments intended to guide troop movements through the rugged terrain of northern Georgia. Garfield believed the Army of the Cumberland should advance more assertively to maintain supply lines and secure advantageous positions. While Rosecrans ultimately made his own decisions, Garfield's memoranda from this period reveal a thoughtful and methodical mind applying itself to the difficult calculations of war. When the Battle of Chickamauga erupted in September 1863, Garfield found himself at the center of the Army's communications. Amid the confusion of the battle, Rosecrans became separated from parts of his forces, and Garfield undertook a perilous ride across shifting lines to deliver orders and assess the situation firsthand. The journey, later widely noted for its danger, reflected not recklessness, but Garfield's calm determination to ensure that commanders received the guidance they needed. Though the Union Army suffered heavy casualties and was eventually compelled to withdraw to Chattanooga, Garfield's conduct during the engagement demonstrated courage and clarity under pressure. In Chattanooga, Garfield worked diligently to reorganize communication channels and support the Army's efforts to withstand Confederate siege operations. The conditions were difficult, supplies scarce, morale shaken, but Garfield's steady presence provided reassurance. His reports to Washington, written in clear and measured language, helped convey the needs of the Army of the Cumberland and advocated support that would eventually contribute to the success of later operations under General Grant. By 1863, Garfield's reputation within military circles had grown considerably. He was admired for his integrity, his analytical mind, and his willingness to undertake demanding tasks without seeking personal credit. Many predicted a long military career for him, yet Garfield harboured no particular attachment to rank or command. He viewed military service as a duty tied to the nation's survival, not as a permanent vocation. In the autumn of 1863, he received an unexpected request: election to the U.S. House of Representatives, where Ohio voters hoped he would bring the same steady judgment he had shown in the field. Garfield initially hesitated, feeling deeply committed to the soldiers with whom he had served. Yet senior officers encouraged him to accept, recognizing that the war effort required thoughtful leadership not only on the battlefield but in Congress. Thus, Garfield's military career, marked by quiet competence and rising responsibility, set the stage for a transition into national public life. His years in uniform had strengthened his confidence, deepened his understanding of the nation's struggles, and revealed capacities that would soon guide him into the halls of Congress, where the next chapters of his life would unfold with the same careful, steady progression that had carried him from rural Ohio to the battlefields of the Civil War. When James Garfield received word that voters in Ohio's 19th District had elected him to represent them in the U.S. House of Representatives, he found himself standing at a quiet crossroads. The nation was still in the midst of the Civil War, and Garfield remained deeply committed to the men serving under him. Accepting a congressional seat meant withdrawing from active military life at a time when the outcome of the conflict remained uncertain. Yet it also meant stepping into a role where legislation, policy, and national direction were shaped, areas where Garfield's disciplined judgment and thoughtful temperament could serve the country in a new and necessary way. Garfield approached the decision with characteristic deliberation. He consulted senior officers, corresponded with trusted friends, and reflected inwardly on the nature of duty. Ultimately, he concluded that service in Congress offered a continuation of his commitment to the Union. The war demanded unity not only in the field but in the halls, where financial appropriations, military oversight, and national priorities were determined. With this understanding, Garfield resigned his commission in late 1863 and prepared to assume his new role in Washington, carrying with him the humility of a man who did not seek advancement but responded steadily to the circumstances of history. Arriving in Washington, Garfield encountered an atmosphere markedly different from the camps and command posts of the Western Theatre. The capital, though still shaped by the strains of war, operated within a slower yet complex rhythm of governance. Legislative sessions unfolded with careful procedure. Debates, though spirited, required calm preparation, and the responsibilities of a representative demanded attention to matters ranging from military supply to taxation. Garfield observed these processes with the same attentiveness he had applied to his early days in the Ohio Senate. His first months in Congress were spent learning its formal structures. He familiarized himself with committee work, procedures for drafting bills, and the expectations placed upon a freshman representative. Garfield listened intently during debates, studying the methods of experienced legislators. Gradually, he he began to contribute his own voice, not with force or excitement, but with the measured clarity that had distinguished him as a teacher, officer, and community leader. When he rose to speak, many colleagues often paused, recognizing in his tone a thoughtful presence capable of articulating complex ideas calmly. Garfield was soon appointed to the House Committee on Military Affairs, a responsibility well suited to his experience. Here he examined matters related to troop organisation, supply management, and battlefield strategy. He reviewed documents with meticulous care, drawing upon his first-hand understanding of army operations. His contributions were valued not because of lofty rhetoric, but because they reflected a quiet, practical knowledge of how policies enacted in Washington affected soldiers in the field. During these early years, Garfield also developed a reputation for financial insight. Though he had not originally imagined himself as a specialist in economic matters, he took seriously the need to understand the federal budget, wartime expenditures, and long-term implications of national debt. Through patient study, he gained a comprehensive view of fiscal policy, which later positioned him as an important voice on matters of taxation, banking, and currency. Garfield approached financial questions not as abstractions, but as mechanisms that shape the stability of the nation, applying his disciplined reasoning to debates that would influence the post-war order. As the war neared its end, Garfield's role in Congress expanded. He spoke on issues of Reconstruction, advocating approaches grounded in constitutional principles and a sincere desire for national reconciliation. His speeches reflected neither harshness nor haste. Instead, they conveyed a belief that unity required both justice and measured policy, qualities he believed essential for healing a nation emerging from deep division. Garfield emphasized the need to protect civil rights while fostering a gradual return to balanced governance in the southern states. The assassination of President Abraham Lincoln in 1865 cast a solemn quiet over the nation. Garfield, like many of his colleagues, felt the weight of the moment. He attended ceremonies honoring the late president and delivered remarks marked by sorrow and dignity. This period strengthened his resolve to approach his responsibilities with seriousness, aware that the nation's future depended on stable leadership. It also deepened his belief that public service required patience, fairness, and calm conviction. Now, throughout Garfield's early congressional tenure, his home life remained an anchor. Lucretia and their growing family moved to Washington, creating a household that balanced the demands of public life with steady routines. Their home offered moments of rest, quiet evenings of reading, gentle conversations, and familiar rituals that restored Garfield after long days in the capital. His letters to friends from this period reveal gratitude for the balance his family provided, an appreciation for the peaceful rhythms that allowed him to sustain his thoughtful approach to public responsibilities. Despite the increasingly complex issues facing Congress, Garfield maintained his preference for continuous study. He spent long hours in the Library of Congress, examining works on law, history, and finance. He believed that a legislator should prepare carefully before shaping policy, and he treated each new subject with the same earnestness that had defined his academic life. His colleagues often found him reading late into the evening, surrounded by stacks of books and notes that he arranged methodically. As debates unfolded over Reconstruction policies, tariff structures, the rights of freed people, and the reintegration of southern states, Garfield's voice grew more prominent. Yet he continued to speak with moderation. His presence in Congress was neither dominant nor withdrawn. Instead, it reflected a steady balance. He did not seek to overshadow others, but offered clarity when discussions required careful thought. His speeches, transcribed in the Congressional Record, show a representative who valued depth over rhetoric and accuracy over haste. By the end of the 1860s, Garfield's influence in Congress had grown quietly but undeniably. He had earned respect across differing political perspectives through his sincerity, diligence, and thoughtful approach. Legislators who disagreed with him on specific measures nonetheless recognized in him a consistent dedication to public service. He became increasingly sought after for committee work, policy guidance, and explanations of complex financial matters. Through these early years in the House, Garfield underwent a transition that mirrored the steady upward progression of his life. He moved from the modest classrooms of Hiram to the camps of Kentucky, from the battlefields of Chickamauga to the deliberative chambers of Congress. In each setting, yet he maintained the calm determination that had marked his character since childhood. His voice in Congress, though not loud, carried weight, not through authority imposed, but through trust earned. The next phase of Garfield's career would expand his responsibilities further, drawing him into some of the most significant legislative and national questions of the era. Yet the foundations he laid during these early years, quiet study, careful reasoning, and unwavering commitment to public good, continued to guide him gently into the growing responsibilities that awaited. As the 1860s gave way to the early 1870s, James Garfield's presence in the US House of Representatives settled into a rhythm defined by quiet diligence and steady expansion of responsibility. He had entered Congress during the final phase of the Civil War, but much of his early legislative life unfolded amid the challenges of Reconstruction, a period that demanded patience, careful reasoning, and a commitment to constitutional principle. Garfield approached these responsibilities with the calm discipline that had characterized every stage of his life, believing that the nation's recovery required not only strong policies, but also thoughtful voices capable of guiding debates without haste or agitation. One of the central issues that shaped Garfield's congressional work was the reconstruction of the former Confederate states. The question of how to reintegrate these states into the Union, while ensuring civil and political rights for freed people, required delicate balance. Garfield supported the Reconstruction Amendments, viewing them as necessary expressions of constitutional clarity. He believed that the 14th Amendment, with its guarantee of equal protection under the law, formed a critical foundation for national unity. His speeches on these matters, delivered in steady tones, emphasized fairness rather than triumph, and constitutional duty rather than political advantage. Yet Garfield also understood the complexities involved. He observed that many southern communities struggled with economic devastation, political instability, and social transformation. His approach sought to balance accountability with measured support, advocating policies that encouraged a gradual return to stable governance. Garfield's writings from this period reveal a man deeply aware of the human dimensions of Reconstruction, its hopes, its sorrows, and the slow work required to rebuild trust between regions. He neither minimized these difficulties nor allowed them to overwhelm his belief in the Union's capacity for recovery. During these same years, Garfield's role in financial legislation grew increasingly prominent. His careful study of economic principles, combined with his disciplined temperament, made him a central figure in debates surrounding national currency, taxation, and public debt. He served on committees responsible for overseeing appropriations and revising financial statutes. The aftermath of wartime expenditures required a thoughtful approach to fiscal responsibility, and Garfield applied himself to these questions with quiet determination. He advocated maintaining the integrity of the national currency, believing that financial stability was essential to restoring economic confidence. These positions were not always popular, and particularly among those who favoured more expansive monetary policies. Yet Garfield defended his views calmly, grounding his arguments in historical examples and careful analysis, rather than in emotional appeal. His colleagues, even those who disagreed with him, recognized the sincerity and discipline behind his reasoning. In 1871, Garfield was appointed to the newly established House Committee on Appropriations, where he soon became one of its most diligent members. His responsibilities included examining departmental budgets, reviewing expenditures, and ensuring that public funds were distributed in accordance with law and necessity. Garfield approached these tasks with meticulous attention, often spending long evenings reviewing documents and preparing questions for committee hearings. His methodical approach earned him respect across party lines, reinforcing his reputation as a legislator committed to careful stewardship rather than political calculation. During this decade, the nation also confronted the complex question of civil service reform. Government positions had long been distributed through patronage, and many reformers argued that merit-based appointments were necessary to strengthen federal administration. Garfield approached this issue with characteristic thoughtfulness. His experiences as a teacher, administrator, and military officer had shown him the importance of competence and integrity in public service. Though he navigated the political realities of the time, he expressed consistent support for measures that sought to reduce corruption and encourage orderly administration. As Garfield's influence grew, so too did the demands on his time. He became a frequent speaker in the House, addressing topics ranging from tariff policy to education. Yet his speeches never displayed excessive flourish or theatricality. Instead, they reflected a mind accustomed to clarity and precision. Garfield believed that public discourse should illuminate rather than overwhelm, and he crafted his arguments with care, building them step by step in a tone that conveyed steadiness rather than force. Amid these responsibilities, Garfield maintained a disciplined personal routine. He continued to rise early, often beginning his day with reading or quiet reflection before attending to legislative duties. Evenings were spent in study or in the calm companionship of his family. Washington, Yore with its mixture of formality and social expectations, never altered Garfield's preference for modest living. His home served as a sanctuary of quiet order, where Lucretia's gentle presence provided balance to the pressures of public life. Their children grew through these years, filling the household with a sense of continuity that anchored Garfield amid the complexities of legislative service. Garfield's intellectual pursuits also continued. He wrote essays on history, philosophy, and the responsibilities of government. Some were published, others remained personal reflections. These writings reveal a mind continually seeking deeper understanding. He viewed public service as an extension of scholarly inquiry, requiring constant study, examination of principles, and a willingness to revise views when evidence demanded it. This academic approach to governance distinguished him from many contemporaries, and it strengthened his reputation as a thoughtful, principled leader. During the early 1870s, political tensions in Washington occasionally grew intense, particularly as debates over Reconstruction, civil rights, and financial policy unfolded. Yet Garfield remained steady. He moved between committee rooms and the House chamber with the calm composure of a man accustomed to careful reasoning. Even when disagreements sharpened, Garfield maintained a tone of civility, demonstrating that firmness and respect could coexist. Younger legislators often sought his counsel, recognizing in him a model of thoughtful engagement. Late in the decade, Garfield became Minority Leader of the House, a position that reflected the quiet confidence his colleagues placed in him. He did not seek the role through ambition. Rather, it emerged naturally as members turned toward the figure whose disciplined approach had guided them through years of national transition. In this capacity, Garfield helped coordinate legislative priorities, articulate policy positions, and maintain the orderly functioning of congressional debate. His leadership style, measured, respectful, and grounded in principle, brought a sense of stability to a chamber often marked by shifting alliances and rising pressures. Through these years, Garfield's influence expanded gently but steadily. He had grown from a young teacher in Hiram to a respected national figure, yet the qualities that shaped his early life remained unchanged. His voice in Congress echoed the same calm reasoning he once used in the classroom. His decisions reflected the disciplined habits formed through study and service. His presence conveyed a sincerity that invited trust. As the 1870s progressed, Garfield's role in national affairs deepened further. The country would face new challenges, political, economic, and moral, requiring leadership capable of combining clarity with patience. Garfield, shaped by years of thoughtful public service, moved toward these responsibilities quietly, prepared not by ambition, but by the steady accumulation of experience that had guided him from rural Ohio into the heart of national governance. As the 1870s unfolded, James Garfield's standing within the U.S. House of Representatives continued its gradual ascent. His long tenure, marked by careful study and steady contributions, positioned him as one of the chamber's most respected voices. Yet the nation during this decade faced a series of complex challenges: economic strain, political contention, and shifting public expectations that required thoughtful leadership capable of navigating uncertainty with patience. Garfield met these demands with the same calm resolve that had guided him through earlier periods of transition, moving steadily into senior roles shaped by responsibility rather than ambition. One of the defining events of this period was the Panic of 1873, a financial crisis that reverberated throughout the country. Railroads failed, banks collapsed, and unemployment rose sharply. The nation's economic foundation, still settling after the disruptions of the Civil War, felt the strain deeply. In Congress, debates intensified over currency policy, debt management, and the measures needed to restore stability. Garfield, already known for his thorough understanding of financial matters, became a key figure in these discussions. He devoted long hours to studying economic reports, reviewing historical precedents, and corresponding with experts. His speeches on monetary policy reflected clarity rather than alarm, emphasizing gradual solutions grounded in fiscal discipline. Garfield supported a return to a stable and reliable currency, believing that long-term economic health required adherence to consistent financial principles. These views were not universally shared, and debates often grew heated. Yet Garfield maintained his measured tone even amid disagreement. His colleagues, observing his calm persistence, respected his ability to approach contentious questions without resorting to rhetoric. In committee work, he guided deliberations with quiet structure, ensuring that decisions rested on evidence rather than impulse. In 1876, Garfield's national profile grew further when he served on a special committee tasked with investigating allegations of corruption within the government's executive departments. The investigation unfolded slowly, requiring careful examination of documents, testimony, and administrative procedures. Garfield's role demanded patience, attention to detail, and a calm demeanour capable of guiding the committee through its responsibilities without increasing partisan tension. His involvement reinforced his reputation as a legislator who approached oversight with fairness and discretion, neither minimising concerns nor allowing political pressures to dictate outcomes. The presidential election of 1876 added another layer of complexity to Garfield's duties. The contest between Rutherford B. Hayes and Samuel J. Tilden resulted in disputed electoral votes from several states, creating uncertainty that lingered well beyond Election Day. To resolve the matter, Congress established the Electoral Commission of 1877, a body composed of senators, representatives, and Supreme Court justices. Garfield was selected as one of the House members on the commission, a reflection of the trust placed in his judgment. He approached the responsibility with solemn care, aware that the outcome would influence not only the immediate election, but also public faith in democratic processes. Throughout the Commission's deliberations, Garfield maintained a steady presence. He reviewed each contested vote with meticulous attention. He listened quietly during long sessions and offered reasoned assessments grounded in constitutional interpretation. The Commission ultimately awarded the disputed votes to Hayes, securing his presidency. While the decision remained controversial, Garfield's conduct during the process demonstrated an unwavering commitment to orderly procedure and constitutional principle. His calm involvement helped prevent the crisis from escalating, reinforcing his role as a stabilizing figure in moments of national uncertainty. As Garfield's responsibilities increased, so too did the demands on his time. Yet he continued to balance legislative duties with family life, maintaining the steady rhythms that had long anchored him. His home in Washington offered moments of quiet respite. Lucretia's thoughtful management of domestic affairs and Sir Stewart, combined with the gentle presence of their growing children, provided Garfield with a place to reflect and regain equilibrium. The steady companionship of his family helped sustain him through periods of intense public scrutiny. During this same period, Garfield also assumed leadership within his party. When the Republicans moved into the minority in the House, Garfield was chosen as their floor leader. This position required careful coordination, clear communication, and the ability to articulate party positions while maintaining a tone of respect across the aisle. Garfield approached the role with characteristic steadiness. He sought to guide debates without heightening tensions, presenting arguments in a calm, methodical manner that reflected his belief in reasoned governance. His leadership helped maintain order during sessions that might otherwise have become contentious. Garfield's intellectual pursuits continued alongside his legislative responsibilities. He wrote essays on topics ranging from education to constitutional interpretation, often working late at night after returning from the capital. His study habits remained disciplined. He believed that public service required constant learning, and he moved through new subjects with the same deliberate care he had applied since his early days at Hiram. These private efforts enriched his public work, allowing him to approach debates with a broad foundation of knowledge. Events in the late 1870s brought additional challenges. Questions of civil service reform, long debated but rarely acted upon, gained renewed importance. Garfield supported efforts to reduce patronage and encourage merit-based appointments, though he understood the practical difficulties of reform in a political culture deeply accustomed to the existing system. He spoke on these matters with moderation, emphasizing gradual change and careful implementation. His approach reflected a belief that reform must be guided by stability, not urgency. Throughout these years, Garfield continued to serve on the Appropriations Committee, where he examined budgets with the same quiet rigor that had characterized his earlier financial work. He encouraged transparent reporting, clear justification for expenditures, and an orderly approach to government funding. His colleagues appreciated his ability to navigate complex budgetary questions without adding unnecessary tension to the process. By the end of the decade, Garfield had become one of the most experienced members of the House, a figure whose influence rested not on force but on trust. His long tenure reflected a steady commitment to public service that extended across changing political landscapes. Whether dealing with financial crises, constitutional questions, or domestic policies, he maintained a tone of calm deliberation. The late 1870s positioned Garfield at the threshold of a new phase in his career. His reputation as a thoughtful leader, combined with years of quiet preparation, drew the attention of colleagues considering him for higher responsibilities. Yet Garfield himself remained grounded in the same humble routines that had shaped his entire life. Teaching when possible, writing when time allowed, and maintaining close ties with his family and the community of Hiram. As the nation prepared to enter a new decade, Garfield stepped forward with the quiet steadiness that had always guided him, ready to take on roles shaped not by ambition, but by deliberate, thoughtful service. As the 1870s drew to a close, James Garfield's long record of calm, thoughtful service had placed him among the most respected legislators in the U.S. House of Representatives. His steady presence, shaped by nearly 2 decades of disciplined study and careful deliberation, made him a natural candidate for broader responsibilities. Yet even as colleagues and observers began to speak of Garfield's suitability for higher office, he himself moved through his daily duties with characteristic modesty, thus unaware that the coming years would lead him toward the nation's highest position. He anticipated continued service in Congress. The presidency lay far beyond any expectations he quietly held. In early 1880, the Ohio legislature turned its attention to selecting a new United States senator. Under the procedures of the time, senators were chosen not by popular vote, but by state legislators, and Garfield emerged as a leading candidate. His long commitment to public service, combined with his reputation for fairness and disciplined reasoning, made him a figure capable of bridging internal party differences. Though Garfield had not openly sought the role, he approached the possibility with the same calm responsibility that characterized all his public work. After a series of measured deliberations within the legislature, he was elected to the Senate, scheduled to assume his seat in March of 1881. The decision marked a turning point in Garfield's life. It appeared that he would now shift from the House, where he had grown into senior leadership, to the quieter, more deliberative chamber of the Senate. He reflected on the new role with a mixture of gratitude and solemn responsibility. The Senate, in his view, offered opportunities for thoughtful engagement with national questions, a setting well suited to his temperament. Yet even as he prepared for this transition, events were unfolding within the Republican Party that would draw Garfield unexpectedly into a different, far more public responsibility. The presidential election of 1880 approached amid divisions within the party. Factions differed over matters such as patronage, reform, and the direction of national policy. The leading contenders, each representing a different coalition, found themselves unable to secure a clear majority among delegates preparing to gather at the Republican National Convention. As a result, there was growing recognition that compromise might be necessary. Garfield, known for bridge building and measured judgment, became a trusted figure among delegates seeking guidance through the complexities of the nomination process. He attended the convention not as a candidate but as chair of the Ohio delegation, focused solely on fulfilling his responsibilities with clarity and fairness. The convention unfolded in an atmosphere of tension balanced by formal order. Delegates cast ballot after ballot, yet no leading candidate secured the necessary support. Garfield's role as a delegate required him to speak at times, offering procedural guidance and addressing the convention with the deliberate calm that had long defined his public voice. His remarks were measured, grounded in a desire to maintain unity rather than inflame division. Observers noted his poise amid uncertainty, a steady presence capable of guiding discussions without imposing his will. As the balloting continued, a subtle shift occurred among delegates seeking a compromise candidate. Garfield's name began to appear in whispered conversations, not through his encouragement, but through the recognition that his integrity and diligence made him acceptable to varied factions. Garfield himself resisted these suggestions, expressing in private correspondence and quiet exchanges that he had not sought the nomination, and did not wish to divert attention from the candidates formally under consideration. Yet the momentum persisted. Delegates, increasingly weary from deadlock, turned toward the figure whose life embodied stability and thoughtful leadership. When Garfield's name finally appeared with significant support during a ballot, he reacted with surprise and humility. He's recorded as having approached the moment with deep reluctance, believing that personal ambition should never guide one's acceptance of national responsibility. But the quiet insistence of the delegates, combined with the absence of a clear nominee among the original candidates, placed him at the centre of a movement toward unity. As ballots continued, Garfield's support grew until, in with the convention's final decision, he was nominated as the Republican candidate for President of the United States. The announcement carried a solemn weight. Garfield accepted the nomination not as a triumph, but as a duty, an acceptance shaped by years of service, study, and moral reflection. He expressed gratitude with quiet dignity, mindful that the responsibility being placed upon him exceeded any position he had previously held. The moment marked the end of his expected path toward the Senate and the beginning of a new chapter he had never anticipated. Returning to Ohio after the convention, Garfield resumed his daily routines with the same modest habits. He continued to study, wrote letters to colleagues with thoughtful explanations of his positions, and met quietly with advisers to consider the responsibilities of the campaign ahead. He avoided unnecessary fanfare, believing that public trust should rest on steady character rather than spectacle. Lucretia, as always, provided calm support, offering thoughtful guidance and maintaining the gentle domestic order that sustained Garfield through periods of transition. The general election campaign unfolded across months, filled with speeches, correspondence, and carefully organized gatherings. Garfield emphasized unity, constitutional principle, and the continued progress of a nation still healing from the effects of war and Reconstruction. His speeches were measured, free from sharp rhetoric, and delivered in a tone that conveyed calm assurance. He believed that the presidency required a steady hand, not forceful alarm, and he shaped his message accordingly. In November 1880, Garfield won the election, defeating the Democratic candidate Winfield Scott Hancock. The outcome reflected the nation's confidence in Garfield's ability to guide the country with fairness and thoughtful restraint. He accepted the result with humility, aware that the presidency, unlike legislative roles, demanded both immediate decision-making and a constant awareness of the nation's broader mood. His life had prepared him for such responsibilities gradually, through years of teaching, military service, legislation, and quiet leadership. The victory, however, did not diminish the sense of calm responsibility Garfield carried into the transition period. He continued to serve in the House until March, fulfilling his duties without interruption, and he spent his quiet hours preparing for the presidency by reviewing departmental reports, studying constitutional questions, and seeking counsel from trusted colleagues. These months reflected the same measured rhythm that had shaped his academic and public life, a deliberate, unhurried preparation for the responsibilities ahead. Thus, in the final years of the 1870s and the threshold of 1881, Garfield experienced a transformation shaped not by ambition, but by steady recognition of his character and capabilities. His path had widened unexpectedly, yet it remained consistent with the qualities he'd shown since youth: diligence, humility, and a commitment to thoughtful service. The presidency awaited him, carrying with it the weight of national expectation and the quiet hope that steady leadership might guide the country into a new decade of stability and progress. As James Garfield prepared to assume the office of president in March of 1881, he carried into the role the same quiet steadiness that had guided him throughout his long career in public service. The transition between election and inauguration unfolded without haste, shaped by thoughtful preparation and a calm awareness of the responsibilities ahead. Garfield, mindful that the presidency demanded both immediate decisions and a deep understanding of national complexities, sought to enter office with careful deliberation rather than ceremony. He approached the coming term not as a personal triumph, but as an extension of his lifelong commitment to service, learning, and the slow work of governance. During the winter months preceding his inauguration, Garfield divided his time between the Washington, D.C. political environment and the quiet surroundings of his home in Mentor, where he engaged in steady reflection. His home, later known as the Lawnfield Estate, became a place of preparation. He studied departmental reports, reviewed constitutional questions, and held measured conversations with advisors. These consultations were not hurried. Garfield believed that the foundation of good governance lay in understanding, not simply in responding to events as they arose. Thus, his preparation took the form of reading, note-taking, and gentle reflection, bringing the same academic discipline he had honed since his days at Hiram. And selecting members of his cabinet presented one of Garfield's early challenges. The Republican Party, though victorious in the election, remained divided between factions with differing expectations and priorities. Garfield, true to his temperament, sought a balanced approach. He aimed to assemble individuals capable of calm deliberation, administrative competence, and a focus on the nation's long-term welfare. His selections reflected both political realities and his desire to guide the government with reasoned stability. At times the process required delicate negotiation, yet Garfield maintained a tone of quiet persistence. He offered explanations, listened carefully to differing views, and sought compromises that would preserve unity without compromising principle. Lucretia, observing these preparations, offered her characteristic steadiness. She understood the quiet weight her husband carried and supported him through the measured rhythms of daily life. The presidency would change their home, their routines, and their interactions with the public, but Lucretia approached these shifts with calm acceptance. Her thoughtful presence remained a source of balance for Garfield, allowing him to navigate the transition with clarity and confidence. The inauguration, held on March 4, 1881, reflected the solemnity of the office rather than any flourish of personal ambition. Garfield delivered his address in a tone marked by quiet dignity. He emphasized national unity, civil rights, and the importance of education, principles that had shaped his life since childhood. He spoke of the responsibilities borne by a nation still adjusting to post-war realities, and he urged a future guided by thoughtful progress rather than sharp division. Observers noted that his words carried both sincerity and calm conviction, qualities that seemed to promise a steady hand for the coming years. Upon entering the White House, Garfield faced the daily responsibilities that accompanied the presidency. The atmosphere differed from the deliberative chambers of Congress. Decisions required greater immediacy, communications flowed constantly, and requests for public appointments arrived in steady streams. Garfield approached these duties with characteristic patience. He organized his days around careful review of documents, extended meetings with department heads, and periods of quiet study. He believed that even the most immediate concerns required measured understanding. One of the earliest and most pressing matters involved the structure of the U.S. Postal Service and the long-discussed issue of patronage. Questions surrounding appointments and administrative control had become sources of factional tension within the Republican Party. Garfield recognized the need for reform, but also understood the delicate balance required to maintain cooperation among party leaders. He approached the matter with quiet firmness, asserting that no appointment should occur without clear regard for competence and integrity. Though this stance generated resistance from certain political figures, Garfield maintained his course gently, believing that orderly administration depended on principled decisions. His leadership extended to matters of national policy as well. Garfield supported efforts to modernize the nation's economic structures, improve infrastructure, and encourage scientific advancement. He remained attentive to education, seeing in it the foundation of a stable and informed society. He also monitored international matters, though he avoided abrupt interventions. Garfield preferred diplomacy shaped by calm consistency rather than forceful assertion. He believed that a nation demonstrated its strength through stability and quiet confidence, not through hurried reaction. In his early months in office, Garfield devoted particular attention to addressing the needs of formerly enslaved Americans and supporting measures that protected their civil rights. He spoke with quiet conviction about the importance of constitutional protections and the nation's obligation to uphold them. These concerns, grounded in his long-standing support for Reconstruction principles, guided his conversations with advisors and legislators. Garfield viewed equality under the law not as an abstract ideal, but as a necessary foundation for national unity. Life within the White House unfolded in a calm but structured rhythm. Garfield enjoyed regular walks, moments of reflection, and time spent reading, habits that helped him maintain balance amid the pressures of public life. Lucretia managed the household with gentle efficiency, creating an environment that supported the president's steady focus. Their children visited often, but bringing warmth and continuity to a home that otherwise carried the weight of daily responsibility. Despite the heavy workload, Garfield did not allow urgency to shape his decisions. He believed that leadership required both patience and clarity, qualities that grew from reflection rather than haste. His days were full, yet he maintained a calm demeanour that reassured those who worked with him. Whether speaking with cabinet members, meeting foreign representatives, or reviewing legislative proposals, Garfield approached each responsibility with careful thought. As spring gave way to early summer, Garfield's presidency entered a period of gradual momentum. Plans for administrative reform began to take shape. Relations with Congress grew steadier. Policy discussions unfolded in an atmosphere of clarity and mutual respect. Garfield understood that his term would require time to establish its direction, and he approached this process without impatience. He believed that the early months of a presidency formed a foundation upon which future progress would rest, and he sought to strengthen that foundation through disciplined preparation. Yet even as Garfield's presidency began to take form, events beyond his control would soon intervene. His approach to leadership, calm, reflective, grounded in principle, remained steady, but the unfolding of his term would be shaped not only by the responsibilities he embraced, but also by circumstances no one could foresee. For now, during these early months of 1881, Garfield's presidency stood as an extension of his character, measured, thoughtful, and guided by the quiet sense of duty that had defined his entire life. The early months of James Garfield's presidency unfolded with a steady rhythm, shaped by thoughtful preparation and calm decision-making. Yet the year 1881, which had begun with such careful intention, soon turned in a direction neither Garfield nor the nation could have anticipated. What followed was a slow, sorrowful chapter, marked not by political debates or administrative reforms, but by the quiet endurance of a man facing grave injury, and by the nation's long, anxious vigil as summer advanced. On the morning of July 2nd, Garfield arrived at the Baltimore and Potomac Railroad Station in Washington, D.C., preparing to begin a journey to New England. Travel for presidents in this era remained unencumbered by elaborate security, and Garfield moved through the station accompanied only by a few associates. The building, with its broad corridors and soft natural light, carried the ordinary bustle of travellers beginning their day. Garfield walked calmly, unaware that an assailant waited nearby. As he moved across the station floor, 2 gunshots broke the morning's quiet. Garfield fell, gravely wounded. These sudden violence contrasted sharply with the gentleness of his character and the calm deliberation he had brought to the presidency. Those nearby hurried to his aid, lifting him carefully and summoning medical assistance. Garfield, conscious in these initial moments, displayed a quiet composure that had defined his entire life. His voice was steady, his concern directed not toward himself but toward the well-being of those around him. Physicians soon arrived. Though medical practice of the time lacked the precision and understanding that later generations would develop, Garfield was taken first to a private room within the station, then transported with great care to the White House. There, in chambers prepared hastily for his treatment, began the long, uncertain struggle that would define the final weeks of his life. The wound, though serious, might not in itself have been fatal, yet infection, a danger poorly understood, posed a constant threat. Doctors attempted to locate and remove the bullet, probing the wound repeatedly in ways that today would be recognized as harmful, though performed at the time with earnest intention. Throughout these early days, Garfield remained remarkably calm. He endured examinations with patience, speaking gently to those attending him. His thoughts often returned to his family. Lucretia, who'd been recovering from an illness at a seaside retreat, travelled with deliberate haste to Washington upon receiving word of the attack. Her arrival brought quiet strength to the White House. Those who witnessed their reunion noted the tenderness between them, shaped by years of thoughtful companionship. She remained near his bedside throughout his suffering, offering comfort through presence rather than words. The White House, ordinarily a centre of activity, took on an atmosphere of solemn stillness. Curtains were drawn to soften the light within the president's room, and visitors spoke in hushed tones. Cabinet members gathered frequently, meeting to discuss the governance of the nation while their thoughts remained anchored in concern for Garfield's condition. Medical bulletins, that issued regularly, attempted to convey cautious optimism, though the course of infection made recovery uncertain. Each report was read by citizens across the country, creating a shared national vigil that extended from farms and cities to distant territories. Newspapers refrained from dramatization, recognizing the quiet dignity of the moment. They described Garfield's steady endurance, the skill and devotion of the physicians, and the unwavering support of his family. Across the country, churches held prayer services, communities gathered in respectful silence, and individuals wrote letters expressing sympathy and hope. The nation, drawn together by concern for its leader, entered a period of waiting, slow, reflective, and filled with a sorrow that deepened gradually as the summer unfolded. Meanwhile, Garfield's room became a place of gentle routine. Physicians adjusted treatments as his condition fluctuated. They observed signs of improvement, then setbacks. Garfield himself, though weakened by fever and pain, remained attentive whenever strength allowed. He asked occasional questions about national affairs, not out of urgency but from a sense of responsibility that remained undiminished. He expressed gratitude to those caring for him, offering quiet reassurances even as his own strength diminished. His family, present throughout these weeks, maintained a calm vigil. Lucretia spent long hours reading softly to him, smoothing his pillows, or simply resting her hand in his. Their children visited as conditions permitted, bringing moments of quiet warmth to the sombre atmosphere. Garfield took comfort in these visits, drawing strength from the gentle presence of those he loved. The White House staff too felt the weight of the moment. They moved gently through the corridors, careful not to disturb the patient or the family keeping close watch. As July gave way to August, Garfield's condition fluctuated with slow, uncertain patterns. Physicians decided to move him from the stifling heat of Washington to the cooler air of the New Jersey coast. On September 6th, after weeks of careful planning, Garfield was transported by special train to the seaside town of Elberon near Long Branch. The journey, undertaken with great care, brought him to a cottage where windows opened to gentle breezes and the soft sound of waves breaking along the shore. Doctors hoped that the cool air might strengthen him, providing comfort even if recovery remained uncertain. The cottage at Elberon became, for a brief time, the final setting of Garfield's life. Here, the president lay in a room arranged for both rest and ventilation, surrounded by his family and attended by physicians who watched over him at all hours. Outside, citizens gathered quietly at a respectful distance, waiting for daily updates from the attending doctors. The sea, calm and unbroken, formed a serene backdrop to these last weeks. Garfield found some comfort in the coastal air, yet his condition, hindered by persistent infection, continued to decline. He endured with patience, speaking little but always with clarity when he found strength to do so. His thoughts turned often to his family, to Lucretia and their children, whose presence remained a source of gentle reassurance. Then he also reflected on the responsibilities he had assumed as president, expressing no regret for the service he had undertaken, only sorrow that he could not fulfill it more fully. On the evening of September 19th, 1881, after long weeks of quiet suffering, James Garfield passed away. His death brought an end to the nation's vigil and marked one of the most solemn moments in American public life. News spread slowly, carried first by telegraph and then by the soft voices of neighbours and community leaders. Across the country, bells tolled, flags were lowered, and citizens paused in stillness to reflect on the life of a man whose presidency had been brief, yet whose years of service had left a lasting impression of dignity, thoughtfulness, and steady devotion to the common good. Garfield's passing marked the close of a long summer of hope, of uncertainty and collective quiet. It remained, in the memory of the nation, a season defined not by the turbulence of politics, but by the gentle endurance of a man whose life had always moved through steady, reflective patterns, even in its final moments. The death of President James Garfield on the evening of September 19th, 1881, cast a profound stillness across the country. In the hours following the announcement from Elberon, communities in every state absorbed the news with quiet sorrow. Telegraph lines, which had carried daily updates on his condition for weeks, now carried the final message that the long vigil had ended. Churches opened their doors for prayer, businesses closed their doors in respect, and families gathered to reflect on the life of a man whose service had been shaped by humility and calm devotion. The national mourning that followed unfolded gently, without the urgency often seen in times of political change. Instead, the country moved through its grief with the same reflective steadiness that had long defined Garfield's character. In Washington, D.C., where Garfield had served through the early months of his presidency, preparations began for the transport of his body to the capital. Government officials moved with quiet ceremony, ensuring that each step reflected the solemn respect due to a leader whose life had been devoted to thoughtful public service. When Garfield's casket arrived in Washington, it was placed in the rotunda of the United States Capitol, where citizens were invited to pay their respects. For 2 days, thousands passed slowly before the casket. They moved in near silence, forming lines that stretched far beyond the Capitol grounds. Many who came had followed Garfield's life closely, from his early days as a teacher and principal in Hiram, to his service in the Union Army, and later to his long tenure in Congress. Others had come to know him only during his brief presidency, but had been moved by the calm dignity he brought to the office. Regardless of how they knew him, those who entered the rotunda shared a common purpose: to honour a man who had carried himself with sincerity and steadiness, always mindful of the responsibilities placed before him. Garfield's family, still grieving yet supported by a sense of national sympathy, remained close together during these days. Lucretia, whose presence had been a source of comfort to her husband in his final weeks, bore her sorrow with quiet composure. Her children, still young, navigated the experience with a mixture of confusion and reverence. They stood close by their mother, receiving condolences with a gentleness that reflected the tone Garfield had always fostered within his home. The public, aware of the family's grief, extended sympathy in a manner marked by restraint and kindness. After the lying in state in Washington, arrangements were made for Garfield's body to return to Ohio, the place where his life had begun and where his memory held its deepest roots. The journey westward unfolded with slow ceremony. A train draped in black bunting carried the casket through towns and countryside, stopping at intervals so that citizens could gather along the tracks. At each stop, people waited in respectful silence, farmers standing beside their fields, Neve families gathered at small stations, veterans of the Civil War who remembered Garfield's service, and former students from his early days as an educator. The steady movement of the funeral train created a quiet procession that stretched across miles of landscape. Observers later described how individuals removed their hats as the train passed, or stood with heads bowed in the fading light of late September. The scene repeated itself throughout the journey, forming a collective expression of mourning that connected distant communities through the shared memory of Garfield's life. Upon reaching Cleveland, the casket was brought to a pavilion erected in the city's public park. Here, thousands of citizens again came to pay their respects. They approached in single file, their steps measured and reverent. Floral arrangements, simple and elaborate alike, were placed throughout the pavilion. Their fragrance filled the air, offering a quiet counterpoint to the grieving voices that spoke in hushed tones. The pavilion remained open through the night, illuminated by lanterns whose soft glow lent the scene a sense of calm permanence. Cleveland, a city closely tied to Garfield's early political life, became a focal point of the nation's mourning. Officials, religious leaders, and ordinary citizens gathered for a memorial service marked by solemn readings and steady reflections. The speakers, mindful of Garfield's preference for calm deliberation, offered tributes focusing on his integrity, his devotion to learning, and his commitment to the responsibilities entrusted to him. There was no attempt to dramatize his life. Rather, the service sought to honor the quiet constancy that had shaped it. From Cleveland, Garfield's body was transported to Lakeview Cemetery, a serene resting place set among rolling hills and shaded paths. The location suited the gentle character of his life. Tall trees formed natural archways, and the soft rustle of leaves carried through the air. The funeral procession moved slowly toward the burial site, accompanied by mourners who walked in steady silence. Among them were family members, long-standing colleagues, and citizens from communities Garfield had touched in various ways. At the graveside, prayers were offered in a tone of quiet reverence. The ceremony reflected the values Garfield had always upheld: thoughtfulness, humility, and sincere dedication to duty. As the final words were spoken, those gathered felt not only the weight of loss, but also the enduring calm of a life lived without agitation or vanity. Garfield had risen from rural hardship to national leadership without altering the gentle rhythm that guided him. His passing, though sorrowful, allowed the nation to express gratitude for the steady service he had given. In the months that followed, memorials appeared throughout the country. Schools, public buildings, and community organizations honored Garfield in various ways, often emphasizing his devotion to learning and public service. Essays and sermons reflected on his life with a tone of quiet admiration. The tragic brevity of his presidency only deepened the public's sense of what might have been. Yet even here, the tone remained restrained. Yet there was recognition that Garfield's greatest legacy lay not in grand accomplishments, but in the example of thoughtful leadership he displayed at every stage of his life. For his family, the period after the funeral brought a gradual return to private routines, though marked permanently by absence. Lucretia withdrew to the quiet of her home in Mentor, supported by close friends and by the steady responsibilities of raising their children. She preserved Garfield's writings, letters, and papers with gentle care, understanding that they represented not only a historical record, but also the inner world of a man whose life had always been defined by reflection. Her stewardship would later contribute significantly to the preservation of his legacy. In the broader public mind, Garfield's memory remained associated with the calm stability he brought to every role he held: teacher, soldier, legislator, and president. The country, having moved through its collective mourning, continued to reflect on the ways his life illustrated the virtues of patience, diligence, and moral clarity. These qualities, expressed without fanfare, left a quiet but lasting impression. Thus the period of national mourning closed with the same steady dignity that had defined Garfield's life. His return to Ohio, carried through the slow procession of late September, marked the final chapter of a journey that began in rural simplicity and rose to national responsibility. The nation remembered him not for dramatic gestures, but for the calm strength he embodied, a strength woven gently through every stage of his brief, our noble presidency and the many years of service that came before it. In the months and years that followed James Garfield's passing, his legacy settled gently into the consciousness of the nation. Unlike figures whose memories are shaped by dramatic achievements or sweeping political transformations, Garfield's remembrance grew from quieter qualities: steadiness, intellectual dedication, moral reflection, and the simple sincerity that guided his public and private life. As communities, institutions, and individuals sought ways to commemorate him, they did so with a tone that echoed the calm rhythms of his character. The nation's tributes unfolded not in sudden bursts of celebration, but through gradual acts of respect that accumulated over time, and forming a lasting portrait of a leader whose life exemplified the dignity of thoughtful service. One of the earliest and most significant tributes arose from Garfield's final resting place in Lakeview Cemetery in Cleveland. The site, chosen for its natural tranquility, soon became a destination for visitors who wished to honor his memory. The rolling landscape, punctuated by gentle hills and shaded paths, provided an atmosphere well suited to reflection. In the years after Garfield's death, plans emerged for a permanent memorial, a structure that would both mark his grave and serve as a place for contemplation. The resulting monument, carefully designed and constructed over several years, incorporated a blend of architectural grace and quiet solemnity. Its interior displays honoured Garfield's life with modest dignity, inviting visitors to reflect on his journey rather than imposing grandeur. As work on the memorial progressed, attention also turned to preserving the documents, letters, and writings Garfield had created throughout his life. His papers, maintained with thoughtful care by Lucretia Garfield, provided insight into the inner workings of a mind devoted to steady inquiry. She recognized that these writings represented an important historical resource, not only for understanding Garfield's personal reflections, but also for appreciating the broader civic and intellectual environment of the 19th century. In carefully organizing his manuscripts, speeches, and correspondence, she ensured that future generations could engage with his thoughts in their original, unembellished form, and Garfield's legacy grew further through the institutions and individuals he'd influenced during his earlier years, particularly those connected to the Western Reserve Eclectic Institute, later Hiram College. Former students, colleagues, and community members recalled his time as a teacher and principal, emphasizing the patience and intellectual clarity that had shaped their experiences. Garfield's impact as an educator, though overshadowed publicly by his later political service, remained central to local memory. The college in turn continued to honour his contributions, preserving accounts of his teaching methods and his dedication to the advancement of learning. His influence in the field of education extended beyond memory alone, but Garfield's belief in the transformative power of learning inspired countless individuals to pursue academic and civic commitments. His life provided an example of how disciplined study and moral clarity could shape public service. In speeches delivered after his death, leaders frequently referenced his journey from modest rural beginnings to the presidency as evidence of the opportunities embedded within thoughtful education. This interpretation, though expressed in broad terms, reflected Garfield's own belief that knowledge formed the foundation of responsible citizenship. Public memory of Garfield also persisted through his legislative work. In Congress, he had earned a reputation for careful reasoning and consistent integrity, qualities that left a quiet but enduring mark. Colleagues remembered his contributions to debates on financial policy, civil rights, and constitutional interpretation. They recalled his tendency to study extensively before speaking, his ability to articulate complex arguments with clarity, and his preference for moderation in both tone and content. These recollections shaped the way historians and citizens understood his role in government, not as a figure defined by dramatic legislation, but as one who elevated the quality of deliberation through disciplined thought. Garfield's military service formed another thread in the tapestry of his legacy. Veterans who had served under him remembered a leader who combined steadiness with empathy, his calm presence in moments of uncertainty, his willingness to share hardships with his men, and his thoughtful approach to command earned lasting respect. These memories influenced how future generations viewed his contributions to the Union effort, not primarily through major battles, but through the measured guidance he offered in early campaigns and his steadfast service in roles of increasing responsibility. The brevity of Garfield's presidency naturally shaped the contours of his legacy. With only a few months in office before the tragic events of July 1881, he left behind a record of early initiatives rather than completed policies. Yet many observers, both contemporaries and later historians, noted that the tone he brought to the presidency carried its own significance. His calm approach to governance, his emphasis on civil service reform, and his preference for careful preparation offered a model of leadership rooted in patience and principle. These qualities, though not developed fully through policy, provided an enduring standard for evaluating presidential conduct. Garfield's legacy also found expression in literature and historical writing. In the years following his death, authors and scholars produced biographies that sought to capture the quiet qualities of his life. These works, often shaped by first-hand accounts from family members and colleagues, emphasized his intellectual habits, his moral foundations, and the steady progression through which he rose from modest circumstances to national leadership. The tone of these biographies mirrored Garfield's own gentleness, offering readers an image of a man who valued substance over display. As time passed, and national memory broadened to include other leaders, Garfield's place in history remained distinct. He was remembered not for dramatic changes enacted during his presidency, but for the character he demonstrated throughout his life. His legacy persisted through personal example, the idea that thoughtful preparation, quiet resolve, and sincere devotion to the public good form the true foundations of lasting leadership. This perception endured across decades, shaping how educators, political thinkers, and ordinary citizens reflected on his life. In Mentor, Ohio, Garfield's home became a place of remembrance, preserved to reflect the calm domestic environment he cherished. Visitors walked through rooms where he had studied and reflected, where he had engaged in quiet conversations with family and friends, and where he had prepared for the responsibilities of the presidency. The house, filled with books and modest furnishings, offered insight into Garfield's daily habits and intellectual pursuits. It stood as a testament to the idea that great responsibilities can emerge from simple routines grounded in learning and reflection. Lucretia Garfield continued to play a central role in shaping her husband's legacy during the decades following his death. Her efforts to preserve his papers, maintain his home, and support memorial initiatives reflected both devotion and a clear understanding of Garfield's historical significance. Through her care, the memory of her husband's thoughtful character remained accessible to future generations. By the early 20th century, Garfield's legacy had settled into a quiet but enduring presence within American history. His story continued to be taught in schools, commemorated in civic ceremonies, and reflected upon in scholarly works. Yet his influence remained gentle, shaped not by sweeping narratives, but by the steady recognition of a life lived with integrity. His contributions, as a teacher, soldier, legislator, and president, remained interconnected through the qualities that defined him from youth to his final days: sincerity, diligence, moral clarity, and a calm devotion to the responsibilities entrusted to him. Thus, Garfield's legacy endures not as a dramatic chapter, but as a long, reflective arc, one that invites contemplation rather than urgency, and one that affirms the lasting power of quiet leadership. In the decades that followed James Garfield's passing, his influence moved gently through American political and cultural life, not in the form of sweeping ideological movements, but through subtler currents, habits of mind, standards of conduct, and a belief in the dignity of thoughtful public service. The leaders who came after him, the communities that remembered him, and the institutions shaped by his presence continued to reflect aspects of his character. His life, marked by steadiness rather than spectacle, lent itself to a form of enduring influence that expanded slowly over time, much like the quiet growth of a tree whose roots deepen beyond sight. The generation of political figures that emerged during the late 19th and early 20th centuries often looked back to Garfield as an example of disciplined public life. Younger legislators, encountering his speeches in printed collections or recalling moments when he had guided congressional debate, found in him a model of reasoned discourse. His practice of studying carefully before speaking and of grounding his arguments in principle rather than expediency offered a path for those seeking to navigate the increasingly complex demands of national governance. In an era when public life often demanded speed, Garfield's example served as a reminder that deliberation and clarity remained essential. His influence extended especially to discussions of civil service reform. Although Garfield's presidency had been too brief to implement comprehensive changes, his firm commitment to appointing officials on the basis of merit rather than political favour became an important reference point in later debates. As reformers seeking to establish lasting principles of professional administration frequently invoked Garfield's early efforts. They noted that he had resisted the pressures of factional patronage, not with confrontation, but with quiet firmness, an approach that underscored the idea that reform required not only new laws but a shift in political culture. When the Pendleton Act was passed in 1883, initiating federal civil service reform, many saw it as an extension of ideals Garfield had articulated in the opening months of his presidency. Educational institutions, too, felt Garfield's influence long after his death. His belief that rigorous study formed the foundation of personal growth inspired generations of teachers and students. Hiram College, where he had once taught mathematics and served as principal, continued to honour his legacy by cultivating an environment that encouraged intellectual curiosity and personal integrity. Students studying his life understood that Garfield's academic journey, from the modest schoolrooms of rural Ohio to the disciplined halls of Williams College, embodied the idea that learning offered pathways to new possibilities. For those who struggled with limited means, his story served as reassurance that steady effort could carry them toward their goals. Garfield's writings, preserved with care, continue to circulate among scholars and historians. His essays on history, governance, and moral philosophy revealed a mind attentive to detail and receptive to quiet reflection. They offered insight into the principles that had shaped his public life, the belief that democracy depended on informed citizens, that leadership demanded humility, and that progress must be guided by reason rather than haste. Historians studying the period often drew on these writings to better understand the political and intellectual climate of the late 19th century. To them, Garfield represented a blend of scholar and statesman, a figure who approached public service with the same careful discipline that shaped his academic work. Beyond political and educational spheres, Garfield's influence lingered within the broader landscape of American civic life. Communities across the country named schools, parks, libraries, and streets in his honour. These gestures, though modest, reflected a widespread desire to preserve his memory not through monuments alone, but through institutions that supported learning and reflection, and many of these places carried forward the quiet values Garfield had embodied. Places where children studied, neighbours gathered, or readers sought the steady comfort of books. In Ohio, his home state, Garfield's memory held particular resonance. His home in Mentor, preserved as a site of historical significance, became a destination for visitors who wished to experience the setting in which Garfield had lived and worked. The rooms, maintained with care, contained the books he'd read, the desk at which he'd written, and the simple furnishings that reflected his modest tastes. Visitors often remarked upon the sense of calm that pervaded the house, a gentle reminder of the quiet rhythms that had shaped Garfield's life. The grounds, with their open spaces and shaded paths, provided an atmosphere suited to contemplation. Schools and community groups visited regularly, using the site as a place to reflect on Garfield's contributions and the broader history of the era. Lucretia Garfield played a central role in sustaining her husband's influence during the decades following his death. Her stewardship of his papers ensured that his thoughts and writings would remain accessible, allowing historians to understand not only the public record of Garfield's life, but also its private dimensions. She lived quietly, dedicating herself to family, correspondence, and the long work of organising materials that reflected her husband's mind. In doing so, she preserved a legacy that might otherwise have faded, shaping the way future generations would come to know James Garfield, not only as a political figure but as a scholar, teacher, and thinker. The Garfield children, as they grew into adulthood, also carried aspects of their father's influence. They pursued varied paths: law, public service, scholarship, each reflecting in gentle ways the values they had observed at home. None sought the intensity of political life at the national level, yet their work displayed a quiet dedication that echoed their father's example. Through their efforts, Garfield's ideals flowed into new contexts, shaping lives in ways both public and private. As decades passed, Garfield's place in historical memory evolved. Later presidents, governing in times of rapid technological change and expanding national responsibilities, encountered challenges far different from those Garfield had faced. Yet scholars and citizens continued to reflect on his brief presidency, further noting its promise and the quiet steadiness of the man who held the office. His truncated term invited contemplation of what might have been, but more importantly it highlighted the qualities he had already demonstrated: disciplined leadership, moral clarity, and a sincere devotion to public good. In broader cultural memory, Garfield came to represent a kind of quiet integrity, often evoked in moments of reflection about American leadership. He was not associated with sweeping transformations, dramatic policies, or grand public displays. Instead, his name called to mind the virtues of patience, thoughtful study, and humility. Schools and libraries frequently included his portrait alongside collections of presidential biographies, not because his presidency reshaped the nation, but because his life illustrated the enduring value of steady, his principled leadership. For historians, Garfield's life offered a window into the transitional years of the late 19th century, a period marked by rapid industrial growth, evolving political structures, and the lingering complexities of Reconstruction. His writings and speeches provided primary sources reflecting the intellectual and moral considerations of the time. His career traced the pathway from modest rural beginnings to national office, offering insight into the social mobility and educational aspirations characteristic of the era. Thus, Garfield's influence continued to expand quietly across generations. It did not rise or fall with sudden shifts in political fashion, but persisted through gradual recognition of the qualities he embodied. Then his life offered a reminder that leadership can be grounded in thoughtfulness rather than ambition, in study rather than spectacle, and in the quiet confidence that emerges from a steady devotion to public service. In this way, Garfield's ideals extended far beyond the years of his life. They settled gently into classrooms, legislative halls, libraries, and homes, wherever individuals sought guidance in moments requiring patience, clarity, and sincere purpose. His legacy, though understated, became a lasting presence in the ongoing story of American civic life, continuing to shape the ways in which citizens understood the virtues that strengthen a common future. As the 19th century drew toward its final decades, James Garfield's family and the institutions shaped by his presence continued to move gently through time, carrying forward the quieter aspects of his legacy. While Garfield himself had passed in 1881, the years that followed became a period of reflection and gradual transition for those who had known him most intimately. His influence lingered not through dramatic events, but through the steady rhythms of remembrance, through papers catalogued carefully in quiet rooms, through the upbringing of children who had grown under his thoughtful guidance, and through communities that continued to honour the example he had set. Lucretia Garfield, who had endured the loss of her husband with calm dignity, embraced the responsibilities of preserving his memory. She devoted herself to organising his correspondence, speeches, and personal reflections, yet understanding that these documents held value not only for historians, but for anyone seeking to comprehend the mind of a man shaped by patient thought and disciplined inquiry. Her work unfolded quietly, often at a writing desk in their mentor home, where she arranged letters in careful order, annotated documents when helpful, and ensured that the record of Garfield's life remained intact for future generations. Life in the Garfield household settled into a routine marked by steady purpose. The children, now growing into adulthood, pursued their own paths while carrying the gentle imprint of their father's teachings. They moved through the world with the modesty and sincerity that had defined family life from the beginning. Though their lives diverged, some entering professions, others building families of their own, they maintained close ties to their mother and to the home that held so many of their early memories. Mentor itself became a place where Garfield's presence was felt most quietly. The grounds of the home offered broad lawns, shaded walkways, and rooms filled with books he'd read and notes he had written. Visitors often remarked upon the sense of stillness that surrounded the place. They found not a monument of grandeur, but a home shaped by learning and reflection, a place where a man once studied late into the night, read calmly beside his children, and prepared thoughtfully for the responsibilities he never sought yet, carried with rare sincerity. Over time, the home became a public site of remembrance, preserved for those who wished to understand the atmosphere that had shaped Garfield's character. In the broader landscape of American history, Garfield's role settled into a place of gentle prominence. He was remembered as a figure whose life embodied the ideals of education, perseverance, and moral clarity. His time as president, though brief, came to be viewed as a moment of transition, representing both the lingering complexities of the post-Civil War era and the country's gradual movement toward modern administrative governance. Scholars continue to study his public speeches and private writings, noting the seriousness with which he approached leadership and the humility that flowed through each decision he made. The passage of time softened the outlines of Garfield's historical image, yet it did not diminish the qualities that had drawn such widespread admiration. Instead, his legacy took on a quiet, introspective character. He became known not for singular dramatic acts, but for the continuity of his values, from his early experiences in rural Ohio, through his years as an educator and soldier, to the reflective steadiness of his congressional life, and finally to the calm responsibility he brought to the presidency. His story offered assurance that public service could rest on a foundation of sincerity and disciplined thought. As the decades passed, anniversaries of Garfield's birth and death inspired reflections in newspapers, schools, and civic gatherings. Communities mark these occasions with gentle ceremonies, shared readings, and thoughtful discussions about the qualities his life exemplified. Teachers referenced his journey to illustrate themes of perseverance and the value of learning. Civic leaders spoke of him as an example of integrity and deliberation in public life. And families, including his own, continued to honour him through small acts of remembrance, visits to his resting place, readings of his letters, and quiet conversations passed between generations. By the early 20th century, Garfield's life had become a thread woven through the larger tapestry of American memory. It did not command the bold colours of dramatic historical events, but rather offered a softer hue, a reminder that the nation's story includes those who advanced it through thoughtful labour rather than spectacle, through steady decisions rather than hurried action, and through patient dedication rather than ambition. Scholars and citizens alike found in Garfield a figure whose example encouraged reflection and calm purpose. Even today, Garfield's influence endures, accessible to anyone who pauses to consider the path he travelled. His story invites contemplation, of a childhood shaped by rural simplicity, of a young man who found solace in books and learning, of a teacher who guided students with patience, of a soldier who served with sincerity, and of a statesman who brought quiet thoughtfulness to the nation's highest responsibilities. His life illustrates how leadership rooted in humility and steady resolve can shape a legacy that outlasts the turbulence of any particular moment. As the long arc of James Garfield's life draws gently to a close, his story settles into a form that reflects its deepest qualities: quiet perseverance, thoughtful inquiry, and a steady devotion to duty. His journey, which began in the simplicity of rural Ohio, thus rose gradually through teaching, military service, and congressional leadership, before reaching the presidency for a brief but meaningful moment. Yet his influence extends far beyond the short span of his tenure in office. It rests instead in the calm example he offered, a reminder that public service can emerge from humility, that scholarship can guide statesmanship, and that a life devoted to careful thought can leave a lasting, peaceful imprint on history. Across the years, Garfield's legacy has continued to move gently through American memory, carried by the families who knew him, the institutions that shaped him, and the countless individuals who find reassurance in the sincerity of his example. His story remains a quiet presence, one that asks nothing of urgency, but offers instead the hope that thoughtful leadership endures beyond the noise of any particular age. As this reflective narrative comes to rest, the pace softens, inviting the mind to settle. Garfield's life, marked by steadiness from beginning to end, leaves a sense of calm continuity, an enduring reminder that the most lasting contributions often arise not from grand gestures, but from the slow, patient work of a life lived with purpose. Should you wish to drift further into the stories of other lives shaped by the quiet turns of history, I'll be here to continue the journey.